Ma'am, you need to step aside. For 1 second, I thought Miles Carter was talking to someone behind me. I was standing beneath the floral arch in my wedding dress, my bouquet resting against my hip, while my own photographer adjusted the angle for one last family shot before the ceremony. Then Miles lifted one hand and pointed directly at me. My sister Jenna had just rushed in from the hallway, breathless, touching the ends of a haircut she had spent most of the morning trying to fix. Miles looked at her, looked back at me, then checked something on his phone. "Wait," I said. "Why do I need to move?" His expression changed from professional certainty to visible confusion. He turned toward my mother. "Your mother told me she was the real bride. Before I tell you how my parents managed to turn the one thing I let them control into the first crack in something much bigger, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from today. Stay with me." Because what I thought was an absurd wedding day stunt turned out to have started months before I ever put on that dress. And if you enjoy stories about families learning that boundaries actually have consequences, please subscribe to the channel and come along for the rest. About 40 minutes earlier, I had still believed the biggest problem of my wedding morning was my 31-year-old sister's hair. Jenna had booked a last-minute salon appointment because she wanted a shorter cut before the ceremony. I had told her twice that changing your hair the morning of somebody else's wedding sounded like a terrible idea, but Jenna had always had a talent for treating warnings like optional background noise. At 11:20, less than an hour before guests were supposed to be seated, Mom came into the bridal suite holding her phone like someone had called from an emergency room. "Jenna hates it," she announced. "The stylist cut too much around her face. She's trying to get someone to fix it." Daniel's sister, who was helping me pin the edge of my veil, glanced at me in the mirror. Our coordinator, Megan, was standing near the door with her timeline folder open. I looked at Mom and said, "Okay, tell Jenna to come when she's done. She can join us as soon as she gets here." I expected that to be the end of it, because Jenna was not a bridesmaid, and she had no role in the ceremony. She was supposed to be in a few family portraits, sit with our parents, eat dinner, and go home like everyone else. Mom stared at me as if I had missed the point. "We can't start without her." "Yes, we can. She can't be photographed like this, Allison." I remember how specific that word sounded even then. Not seen, not embarrassed. Photographed. At the time, I assumed Mom was being superficial, which would not have been unusual. Diane Parker could turn a family Christmas card into a production meeting. She had opinions about lighting at graduations, table placement at birthdays, whether people should stand or sit in anniversary photos. I had spent most of my adult life learning that the quickest way to survive one of her image campaigns was to set a boundary early and refuse to negotiate it afterward. Dad came in a moment later, already wearing his suit jacket, even though the room was warm. "Your mother told me what happened," he said. "We're not starting without Jenna." Megan looked at me, not them. That mattered. I had hired her. She knew whose decisions controlled the timeline. "We have about 15 minutes of flexibility," she said quietly. "After that, if we push the ceremony, dinner service starts moving too. The venue team is scheduled to flip the arch area right after you finish." I looked at the clock. "We'll give her 10 minutes. At the end of 10, we move." Mom's mouth tightened. 10 minutes isn't enough if they're trying to fix a bad cut. Then she'll arrive after we start." "Allison." "Mom, this is not a negotiation." I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten to have anybody escorted out. I had learned a long time ago that my mother did better in arguments when she could pretend the argument itself was the problem. If I shouted, she became the wounded parent. If I stayed calm, she eventually had to deal with the actual words I was saying. She hated that much more. Daniel appeared in the doorway from the adjoining hall, where he had been getting ready with his brother and 2 friends. We had agreed not to do a first look, so technically he was not supposed to see me yet. He kept his body angled away and called through the half-open door. "Everything okay?" "Jenna's late. Do we need her for something?" "No," Mom answered at the same time. "Yes." Daniel made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I'm going with the bride on this one." Mom muttered something about people thinking weddings had stopped being family events, but she walked away with her phone. I thought the issue was contained. That was my mistake, although I don't mean I should have known what she was actually doing. I mean, I still believed the rules I had stated were rules everyone else was operating under. That belief went back to the only concession I had made to my parents during the planning process. Daniel and I had paid for almost everything ourselves. We had chosen the venue outside Columbus, the caterer, the florist, the DJ, the coordinator, and our primary photographer, Lena, whose work I had followed for nearly 2 years. My parents offered opinions about all of it, but opinions were not decisions. Whenever Mom pushed too hard, I said some version of, "We've already decided." I was not 19. I did not need permission to have the wedding I wanted. About 7 months before the wedding, Mom changed tactics. Instead of trying to replace something I had chosen, she asked if she and Dad could contribute something additional. "At least let us give you the photographer," she said over dinner one night. "Your father feels terrible that you're paying for everything. We already have a photographer. A second one then. Family pictures. Candids at the reception. Something that comes from us." I told her we did not need 2 photographers. She kept asking for almost 3 weeks, always framing it as the one meaningful gift I was refusing to let them give me. Eventually, I called Lena and checked her contract myself. I did procurement for a living. Reading scope restrictions and exclusivity language was not difficult for me. Lena's agreement allowed a secondary photographer as long as that person did not interfere with ceremony coverage, couple portraits, or the shots she was contracted to control. I called Mom afterward. "Fine. You can hire someone for extended family portraits and reception candids. That's it. You do not change the timeline. You do not give him instructions about Daniel and me without going through Megan." Mom was delighted. Dad told me I was finally letting them contribute like normal parents. The photographer they chose was Miles Carter. I reviewed his portfolio before I agreed. He was experienced, his work looked professional, and he had good reviews. Mom told me Jenna would help him identify extended relatives because Jenna supposedly remembered everyone's faces better than I did. That was probably true. I did not object when Mom said she was adding Jenna as a secondary contact for groupings. In my head, that meant Jenna could tell a photographer which cousin belonged to which aunt. It did not occur to me that anyone would use that access for something else. Looking back, the dangerous part was not that I had no boundaries. I had plenty. The dangerous part was that I thought a clearly written boundary prevented people from trying to cross it. At work, scope mattered because contracts mattered. If someone wanted to change deliverables, there was a process. At home, I had assumed the same basic good faith existed underneath all the complaining. By 11:38 on the wedding morning, my 10-minute grace period was almost over. Megan came back and told me the venue staff needed a decision. Lena was already positioning the few family members who were actually present for pre-ceremony portraits. Miles was near the floral arch with his camera bag open, checking his phone repeatedly. I noticed him because he seemed unusually concerned about the clock. Mom noticed me noticing him. "He only has a short window," she said. "Then he should take the pictures he can take. He needs Jenna. For family pictures, she can do them at the reception." Mom shook her head sharply. "No. This is when we planned them." That was the first moment I felt something beyond irritation. "Planned what?" She looked past me toward the hallway. "The family session." "Which family session?" Dad stepped closer before she answered. "Allison, don't start. Jenna is almost here." Megan looked down at her watch. "We need to seat you in 5. I picked up my bouquet. "Then seat me in 5. Mom said my name again, this time with the tone she used when she wanted me to remember every favor she believed she had ever done for me. I turned toward her. "I gave Jenna time. She chose to cut her hair this morning. I'm not moving my ceremony because she doesn't like the result." Dad's jaw tightened. "It's 10 minutes. "No. It was 10 minutes. Now it's the ceremony." I walked out of the bridal suite with Megan and Lena. I could hear Mom behind me telling Dad to call Jenna again. Daniel was waiting farther down the hall where he still could not see me directly. Megan guided me toward the side entrance near the ceremony space, while Lena checked the light under the arch. The venue had set up a temporary path so family portraits could happen without bringing me through the guest seating area. Most of the guests were already inside, the string quartet had started. Lena asked me to stand beneath the arch for one quick shot with my parents before she cleared the space for the processional. Dad came reluctantly. Mom followed, still staring at her phone. Miles moved closer, but Lena raised one hand and said pleasantly, "I've got this frame, you can grab candids from the side." He stopped immediately. That was another reason I did not blame him later. He understood professional boundaries when someone actually gave them to him. Mom did not smile for the first picture. She kept looking past Lena toward the hallway. Then the side door opened. Jenna rushed through wearing a pale blue dress and holding a small bag in one hand. Her hair was shorter than it had been at the rehearsal dinner, styled into soft waves that looked perfectly normal to me. She was flushed and irritated, but nothing about her appearance explained the panic my mother had created. "I told you I'd get here," Jenna said. Mom's entire face changed. Thank God. She did not hug her. She did not ask if she was okay. She turned immediately toward Miles. There she is. Miles followed her gaze. I watched him look at Jenna for several seconds. Then he looked at me. His eyebrows drew together. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened something. I could see a small image on the screen from where I stood. It was Jenna. "What?" I asked. Miles looked at Mom. "This is Jenna?" "Yes," Mom said quickly. "That's Jenna." He looked back at the phone. "Okay." Lena lowered her camera. I could tell she sensed the problem before I did. Miles stepped toward the arch. "Ma'am, you need to step aside." For a second, I honestly thought he was speaking to Mom. Then he pointed at me. "Wait," I said. "Why do I need to move?" He looked embarrassed now, not authoritative. "I'm sorry. I was told this was the bridal family setup." "It is." His eyes moved from my dress to Jenna, then back to his phone. Mom said, "Miles, just take the picture." I turned to him. "Who hired you?" "Your parents." "What name is on your client sheet?" He hesitated. "Jenna Parker." Something in the air changed. Even Dad stopped looking annoyed and started looking uncomfortable. I asked, "As what?" Miles swallowed. "Bride." I stared at Mom. She said, "Allison, don't do this here." "I'm not doing anything. I'm asking a vendor what he was hired to photograph." Miles turned slightly toward Mom, his confusion hardening into concern. "Your mother told me she was the real bride." Daniel came around the corner at exactly the wrong moment to maintain our no first look plan. He saw me, stopped, then saw Jenna and Miles. Under any other circumstances, I might have cared that he had seen my dress before I walked down the aisle. At that moment, I barely noticed. "What did he just say?" Daniel asked. Mom moved toward me. "It's not what you think." Daniel looked at Miles. "Are you telling me someone hired you to photograph Jenna as the bride at our wedding?" Miles raised both hands slightly. "I was hired for a separate family package. I was told the primary team was handling ceremony coverage. My client intake lists Jenna Parker and Caleb Morris. Jenna Ventpale. That mattered to me, but I did not have time to decide what it meant." Daniel looked at my parents. "They're leaving." "No," I said. He turned to me. "Allison." "I mean not now." I looked at Megan. "How late are we?" 7 minutes past the time I wanted you moving. "Then we move." Mom stared at me. "You can't just ignore this." "I'm not ignoring it. I'm refusing to spend my ceremony on it." I turned to Miles. "If you stay, you follow Megan's instructions or mine. No separate session with Jenna. No pictures using our ceremony setup unless I approve them. If that doesn't work for your contract, you can stop shooting." Miles nodded immediately. "That works for me, and I'm sorry." I believed him. He looked like a man who had just realized his clients had placed him in the middle of something he had never agreed to be part of. Mom tried again. "You told us we could handle the photographer." I looked at her. "I gave you one vendor. I didn't give you my wedding." Daniel reached for my hand. Megan gave us 30 seconds to reset before she separated us again so I could still make some version of an entrance. Lena quietly repositioned everyone. Jenna stood near the wall, looking as if she wanted to disappear. Dad would not meet my eyes. I walked down the aisle 9 minutes later than planned. The strange thing is that once I saw Daniel waiting for me, the rest of the room blurred. My mother was there. My father was there. Jenna was there. Miles was somewhere behind them. None of them mattered as much as I had expected them to 10 minutes earlier. Daniel smiled when I reached him, and the expression on his face reminded me what the day was actually for. We got married. I did not stop the ceremony to demand an explanation. I did not turn around and accuse my mother in front of everyone. I did not hand my wedding over to the people who had already taken enough minutes from it. At the time, that felt like the clearest decision I had made all day. After the ceremony, while guests moved toward cocktail hour, Miles approached me near the side hallway. He kept a respectful distance and held his phone where I could see it without handing it over. "I want you to see why I was confused," he said. On the screen was the client intake page. Bride, Jenna Parker. Groom, Caleb Morris. Secondary contact, Jenna Parker. There was a reference photo of Jenna, the same one I had seen him checking under the arch. I looked at the date at the bottom of the form. Then I looked again. It had not been entered that morning. It had not been changed after Jenna's haircut. It had not been some panicked mistake my mother made because she wanted my sister included in a few family pictures. The intake had been created more than 6 months before my wedding. And that was when I understood that whatever my parents had planned, they had been planning it for a very long time. The first thing Daniel said when the cocktail hour doors closed behind us was, "Tell me you don't actually expect me to pretend that was normal." We had been married for less than 15 minutes. My veil was still pinned in place. My bouquet was on a chair beside us, and somewhere on the other side of the wall, 200 people were drinking champagne and talking about the ceremony. Daniel and I were supposed to have 5 quiet minutes before family photos resumed. Instead, he was pacing near the window with his tie already loosened, trying not to look as angry as he felt. "I don't expect you to pretend anything," I said. "I just don't want to spend the next 4 hours chasing my parents around this building. They hired a photographer who thought your sister was the bride." "I know. They gave him Jenna's name, Caleb's name, 6 months ago. I know that too." Daniel stopped pacing. "Then why are they still here?" Because the honest answer was complicated, and I did not want to lie to him just because I was trying to stay calm. Part of me wanted Mom and Dad gone. A larger part wanted them contained. If I turned the reception into an expulsion scene before I understood what they had actually planned, I would hand Mom exactly what she was best at using: chaos. She could cry, Dad could accuse me of humiliating them, Jenna could become the victim of a wedding day misunderstanding, and by midnight, the story would be about my reaction instead of what they had done. "I'm not protecting them," I said. "I'm protecting the rest of today." Daniel studied me for a moment, then nodded. That was one of the reasons marrying him had never felt like another negotiation in my life. He did not confuse disagreement with disloyalty. "Fine. But if they try anything else, I'm not smiling through it." "Neither am I." Megan knocked before coming in. "I need you both for the couple portraits in 3 minutes. Also, I need to tell you something before you go back out there." The look on her face made me set down the water glass I had just picked up. "What?" "Your mother asked one of the venue attendants where Jenna could change clothes." Daniel looked at me. Megan continued. "She said it was for a quick formal session Miles was supposed to do before dinner. I told the attendant not to give her a room until I checked with you." I closed my eyes for half a second. Of course she did. There's a garment bag outside the family lounge. "What color?" Megan gave me a look that told me she already knew why I was asking. "Ivory." Daniel said something under his breath that I chose not to repeat. We left the room together, though Lena intercepted Daniel almost immediately and redirected him toward the terrace for our scheduled portraits. I told him I would be there in 5 minutes. He did not like it, but he went because both of us understood the same thing. If I wanted to protect the wedding, I needed to deal with the interruption efficiently, not turn every new clue into a 40-minute confrontation. The garment bag was hanging from a brass hook just outside the small lounge near the ballroom. Mom stood beside it with Jenna, who had taken off the pale blue wrap she had worn over her dress earlier. Dad was at the far end of the hall talking to a relative, pretending not to watch us. "What's in the bag?" I asked. Mom folded her arms. "Clothes. I assumed that. Jenna looked tired more than guilty. It's just a dress. For what? Mom answered before she could. Pictures. I unzipped the bag enough to see the top half of an ivory cocktail dress with a fitted bodice and a satin finish. It was not a bridal gown. Nobody could have mistaken it for one up close. But under a floral arch, with the right framing and a man in a suit beside her, it would photograph exactly the way someone wanted it to photograph. I let the zipper fall closed. Why does Jenna need to change into ivory for family pictures at my wedding? Mom's expression tightened. Because we already paid Miles for the session. That does not answer the question. You are making this much uglier than it needs to be. No, I'm asking why my sister brought a white dress to my wedding so the photographer you hired could pose her like a bride. Jenna finally stepped in. Mom said she wanted a few formal pictures of me and Caleb while everything looked nice. That's it. Did you know Miles had you listed as the bride? Her eyes moved toward Mom for just a fraction of a second. That answer was not enough for me yet, but it was enough to make me notice. I knew she added me as a contact, Jenna said. I didn't fill out his contract. That wasn't my question. She looked at me. No. I didn't know he was going to call me the bride. Mom made an impatient sound. For God's sake, Allison, these are labels on a form. You're acting like someone forged a marriage license. That choice of comparison was so specific that I almost laughed. Nobody said anything about a marriage license. Then stop behaving like this is some kind of crime. I haven't called it anything. I'm trying to understand what you planned. Dad came closer now. You've already had the ceremony. Why are we still doing this? I looked at him. Because apparently you weren't finished. Before either of them could answer, Caleb appeared at the end of the hallway. He had been greeting guests and looked genuinely confused to find the four of us clustered around an ivory dress. What's going on? Jenna's posture changed immediately. Nothing. Mom's upset because the pictures are getting messed up. Caleb looked at the garment bag. Those pictures? I turned to him. What did Jenna tell you they were? He frowned. What do you mean? The session with Miles. What did you think you were doing? Caleb looked from me to Jenna. There was no defensiveness in his face yet, just growing discomfort. Diane said she'd booked a short formal session since everybody was already dressed up. Jenna called it engagement pictures, basically. I thought it was a little weird to do it here, but... He shrugged once. Your parents paid for it. Were you told Miles had been given your name as the groom? That changed his face. No, Jenna said quickly. Caleb, it's not like that. What does that mean? Mom stepped between the conversation before it could go anywhere useful. It means Allison is blowing up a harmless photo session because she's still angry Jenna was late. I stared at her. You really want to use the haircut as the explanation for this? She opened her mouth. Megan appeared again. Allison, Lena needs you now. That gave me a choice, and it was not a difficult one. The people in front of me had already taken enough minutes from the day. I looked at Jenna. Do not change into that dress. Then I looked at Mom. No separate session using the arch, ballroom setup, staircase, sweetheart table, or anything else from our wedding. If Miles takes pictures tonight, he follows Megan's schedule. Mom's voice rose. You cannot cancel something we paid for. I can stop you from using my wedding as the set. Caleb looked at Jenna again. Why did she just say you were going to use the arch? Jenna shook her head. Because Mom wanted pictures. I turned away before the conversation could drag me back. You two should probably talk. I joined Daniel on the terrace. He took one look at my face and did not ask what happened until Lena finished the first set of photographs. That was another thing I appreciated about him. He knew the difference between being present and demanding immediate access to every thought I had. When Lena moved us to another spot near the windows, I told him quietly about the ivory dress and what Caleb had said. So he didn't know, Daniel said. Doesn't sound like it. What about Jenna? I don't know yet. You think she does? I think she looked at Mom before she answered me. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's not proof. I know. He smiled without humor. You really are incapable of switching off the procurement brain. Apparently not on my own wedding day. Good. Just remember, we're also supposed to have pictures where we look happy we got married. That made me laugh despite myself, which was exactly what I needed. Lena caught the moment and took the picture. When I saw it later, it became one of my favorites because it was one of the few photographs from that hour where I was not thinking about my mother at all. We finished our scheduled couple portraits and returned toward the ballroom. Miles was standing near the service hallway, camera lowered, as though he had been waiting for a moment when he could speak to me without Diane nearby. "Can I clarify something?" he asked. Briefly, he nodded. "I don't want you thinking I knowingly came here to interfere with your photographer. Your mother told me the other team was handling the ceremony and that I was responsible for the family wedding portraits." "What exactly did she ask you to shoot?" Miles glanced toward the ballroom, then back at me. "The list in my file has Jenna alone under the arch. Jenna and Caleb under the arch. Jenna with your parents, couple portraits on the staircase, and a few ballroom frames. She asked for a mix of formal and candid. There was also a note that the main ceremony coverage wasn't my responsibility." "Did she call them engagement pictures?" "No." "What did she call them?" "Bridal family portraits." I felt the answer settle into place without yet connecting to anything bigger. "And Jenna was your secondary contact?" "Yes, mostly group coordination. She messaged me about whether the arch would still be available and what time the family session had to happen." "When?" "Over the last couple of weeks." That was new, but I refused to turn the hallway into an interrogation. "Keep those messages." His expression sharpened. "Do you think something's wrong?" "I know something's wrong. I don't know what yet. I won't delete anything." "Thank you." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I should have confirmed who the actual couple was before today." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He accepted that without argument, which earned him more respect from me than an elaborate excuse would have. "Understood." I left him there and went into the reception. Mom caught me before Daniel and I were announced. "Are you seriously refusing to let Jenna take 5 pictures?" "Yes. You said we could handle the photographer." I had already heard that sentence once, but the second time it irritated me more because now I understood what she meant by it. Not that she had paid for a service. She believed my concession gave her authority over whatever she had attached to that service. "I gave you one vendor," I said. "I didn't give you my wedding. It wouldn't cost you anything." There it was. A sentence I had heard in 100 forms over the years. It would not cost me anything. I was already here. The flowers were already paid for. The room was already decorated. The photographer was already hired. Jenna only needed a few minutes. The assumption underneath all of it was that if something did not empty my bank account or break my bones, it did not count as being taken from me. "It costs me the right to decide what my wedding is used for," I said. Mom rolled her eyes. "You always make everything sound so transactional." I almost admired the irony. "I'm going to my reception." She reached for my arm, not hard, but I stepped away before she touched me. "Don't do that." Her hand dropped. For the next 2 hours, I did what I had promised Daniel I would do. I stopped chasing the problem. We were announced. We danced. We ate dinner. I talked to people I actually wanted to talk to. Daniel's best friend gave a speech that was funny without humiliating either of us. My aunt from Cleveland cried during the father-daughter dance even though Dad spent most of it stiff and quiet. Jenna stayed near Caleb. She never changed into the ivory dress. Miles followed Megan's schedule exactly. He took candid reception shots, a few extended family portraits, and nothing that treated Jenna like a bride. Lena remained in control of the work we had hired her to do. If anyone noticed tension between my parents and me, nobody said anything to my face. I wish I could say I forgot about the client intake for the rest of the night. I did not. Every time I saw Mom whispering to Dad or Jenna checking her phone, I wondered what else had been planned before I ever walked into that building. But I refused to let curiosity become another form of theft. I had spent months planning that reception with Daniel. My parents had already interfered with the first hour. I was not going to voluntarily give them the next 3. By the time we left, I was exhausted in the satisfying way people are supposed to be exhausted after their wedding. Daniel and I had decided against flying anywhere immediately. We had a 3-night stay booked in Hocking Hills starting the next morning. close enough that we could drive without turning the weekend into another logistical project. That night, we were staying at a hotel near the venue. Megan handed me my phone and small clutch before we got into the car. I had barely looked at either since the ceremony. There were dozens of congratulations, a few missed calls, photos from friends, and one voicemail from Gloria Parker. Gloria was Dad's cousin, older than me by decades, and not someone I saw often. She lived several states away and had never been on our wedding guest list. Daniel and I had kept the event fairly limited, and Gloria was one of those relatives who received most family news through my parents rather than through me. I almost left the message for later. Then I saw she had called twice. I pressed play. "Allison, honey, I know you're probably busy and I don't want to bother you tonight. I just wanted to say congratulations to you and Daniel. Your mother told me Jenna and Caleb were keeping their thing tiny too, so I knew I wouldn't be there for that, but I hope everything went beautifully for all of you. And I really hope what I sent helped them keep the venue. Your mother sounded so worried when she called me about the deposit. Anyway, don't call me back tonight. Enjoy yourself. Love you." I did not move after the message ended. Daniel had been reaching for the car door. He stopped when he saw my face. "What happened?" I played the voicemail again. This time, when Gloria said Jenna and Caleb were keeping their thing tiny, Daniel looked directly at me. When she mentioned the money, his expression changed completely. He waited until the message ended. "What venue?" he asked. I stared at my phone. "I have no idea." Then I replayed one sentence in my head. "I really hope what I sent helped them keep the venue." My mother had not merely told a photographer that Jenna was the bride. She had told Gloria that Jenna had a wedding venue, and apparently, Gloria had paid to save it. We left for Hocking Hills the next morning with 2 overnight bags, a box of leftover wedding cake, and a voicemail I had replayed enough times that Daniel finally asked me to stop listening to it in the car. He was right. Gloria had specifically told me not to call her back that night, and I had already made one decision I was determined to keep. My parents were not getting the rest of our wedding weekend just because they had managed to damage part of the first day. The drive southeast from Columbus gave me too much time to think, but I kept my phone face down in the cup holder. Daniel and I had booked 3 nights in a cabin tucked into the hills, close enough to get there without dealing with airports, and far enough from home that nobody could reasonably show up at the door. We hiked the first afternoon, ate dinner outside when the weather held, and spent the next 2 days doing exactly what we had planned before anyone had turned my wedding into a mystery. I did not call my mother. I did not call Jenna. I did not open the family group chat. Whenever my mind returned to Miles's intake form or Gloria's voicemail, I made myself remember that I did not have to solve everything immediately, just because I was capable of solving it eventually. Looking back, that pause was one of the smartest things I did. I had spent years reacting to family emergencies on their schedule. Somebody called, I answered. Somebody needed something. I rearranged my plans. Even when I said no, I still let the request occupy the rest of my day. Hocking Hills was the first time I understood that refusing a demand and refusing to surrender your attention were 2 different boundaries. We got home on Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, I had unpacked, answered the essential work emails I had ignored during the wedding weekend, and made coffee before opening Gloria's voicemail again. This time I listened with a notebook beside me. Daniel was already dressed for work when he walked into the kitchen. "You're calling her?" "Yes. Want me here?" I thought about it. "No, but stay nearby for 10 minutes. He kissed the top of my head. "That sounds ominously specific. I don't know what she thinks she paid for. I don't want to react before I understand." "That sounds like you." He left his mug on the counter and went into his office. "I called Gloria." She answered on the second ring. "Allison? Honey, I told you not to worry about calling me back right away. We just got home. I wanted to thank you for the message. You sounded beautiful in the pictures your father sent." I paused. "Dad sent you pictures?" "Just one from the ceremony entrance. You and Daniel looked very happy." That gave me my first small piece of relief. She knew I had gotten married. At least nobody had tried to convince her that the ceremony she had seen belonged to Jenna. Then I remembered what she had actually said in the voicemail. "Gloria, Can I ask you something about the money you mentioned? She went quiet for a second. Of course. What venue did you think you were helping Jenna keep? The silence stretched longer this time. I don't know the name, she said finally. Your mother didn't tell me that part. She just said Jenna and Caleb had found a place they loved and were about to lose the deposit. When did she tell you that? Back in the fall, I think. Maybe October. I wrote October on the page. Did she say the wedding was on April 18th? She said spring. Later she told me it was the same weekend as yours. But she made it sound like Jenna and Caleb were doing something very small around the same time. I assumed there was some kind of family arrangement, honestly. That sentence bothered me because I could hear how carefully my mother had built the ambiguity. She had not needed Gloria to believe Jenna was getting married in front of 200 people at my ceremony. She only needed Gloria to believe there was a legitimate second event, somewhere close enough in time and detail that a venue deposit made sense. Were you invited to Jenna's wedding? No. Diane told me they were keeping it tiny. She said they were embarrassed they couldn't afford something larger. Were you invited to mine? No, sweetheart, but I never expected to be. You and I don't exactly see each other every Christmas. Her tone held no resentment. That mattered too. Gloria was my father's cousin. We had always gotten along, but she lived several states away, and our contact had mostly been birthday cards, occasional phone calls, and family updates passed through my parents. She had never followed me on social media. I did not think she even used anything besides Facebook, and rarely at that. Did Mom tell you not to mention the money to Jenna? Yes. What exactly did she say? Gloria sighed. Something about Jenna being humiliated that they were short. Your mother said she didn't want Jenna to feel like everybody knew. I leaned back in my chair. Gloria, I need to ask you something else, and I don't want to scare you. Do you still have the messages? I think so. Would you be comfortable sending me the whole thread? Not screenshots if you can avoid it. Just forward the messages or export the conversation if your phone lets you. Now she sounded worried. Allison, is something wrong? I looked through the glass doors toward the backyard, where the grass was still damp from overnight rain. I don't know yet, I said. That's the truth. But Jenna did not have a wedding at my venue. She didn't have a ceremony there at all. Mom hired a photographer who had Jenna listed as the bride, and I found out on my wedding day. Gloria did not say anything. I continued before the silence could turn into panic. I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet. I just need to know what you were told. When Gloria finally spoke, her voice had changed. How much do you know? Not enough. I sent $8,000. For the first time in the conversation, I stopped taking notes. $8,000 was not a casual wedding gift. Gloria was retired. She lived comfortably, but she was not wealthy. I knew enough about her life to understand that $8,000 had come from real savings, not money she would forget by the end of the month. 8? I repeated. Yes. Your mother said they were short on the deposit and part of the first catering payment. She made it sound like if they missed the deadline, they'd lose the venue. I closed my eyes. Did she ask for 8? No. She said they were short by around 7, and I rounded it up because I thought they would need other things. Where did you send it? To the account details Thomas texted me. That pulled Dad into the center of the page immediately. Thomas sent you the payment information? Yes. Diane said he was keeping track, so nobody gave too much. I wrote that down too. Gloria must have heard my pen because she said, "You're making a list." I am. Don't fight with her for me. I looked up even though she could not see me. What? Your mother. Don't call her screaming on my behalf. Just tell me the truth. The sentence did something to me I was not expecting. Up to that point, I had been angry on principle. My mother had lied to Miles. She had tried to stage bridal photos of Jenna at my wedding. Those things were insulting and bizarre, but I could still hold them at arm's length as things done to me. Now Gloria was asking me not to use her pain as ammunition. I will, I said. I'll tell you exactly what I can prove. Thank you. A few minutes after we hung up, my phone began filling with forwarded messages. Gloria had found the thread. The first message from Mom was warm and casual. How are you doing? We miss you. Jenna and Caleb finally found a place they love for the wedding, but they're trying to keep things small. 3 days later, the tone changed. They're in a difficult spot with the venue deposit. Jenna would die if she knew I told anyone. She's embarrassed they can't manage it themselves. Then another. Please don't mention this to her. She wants everyone to think they handled it without help. There it was again. Secrecy framed as protection. Dad's text came afterward, giving Gloria payment instructions and saying, "Diane told me you wanted to help. I'm tracking everything so nobody overcontributes." I forwarded the thread to myself, saved the attachments, and wrote down the dates. I did not label anything fraud. I did not write theft. I wrote only what I knew. Gloria was told the money was connected to Jenna's wedding venue and catering. Thomas provided payment instructions. Gloria sent $8,000. That was enough for one morning. Then I opened the wedding folder on my laptop. I had kept every major document because of my job: venue contract, deposit receipts, catering agreement, florist invoice, payment schedule, change orders, emails with Megan. Nothing about that was unusual for me. Daniel once joked that if our wedding cake had arrived 2 inches shorter than specified, I would have produced a signed exhibit showing the promised tier height. I opened the venue contract first. The agreement listed Daniel Brooks and Allison Parker. Deposit paid 9 months before the wedding. Second payment 6 months before. Final balance due 14 days before the event. I checked the date on Gloria's first serious conversation with Mom, October 19th. Then I checked our venue records. By October 19th, Daniel and I had already paid the initial deposit months earlier, and there was no separate reservation under Jenna or Caleb connected to our event. That alone did not tell me where Gloria's money went. It told me something narrower and more useful. The specific venue crisis Gloria had been told about had nothing to do with any event I could verify. Daniel came into the kitchen just as I was printing 2 pages. "You're at the printer stage," he said. "That's bad? It means you've stopped being curious and started building something." I handed him the first page. Gloria sent $8,000. He read the thread, and his expression hardened. $8,000? She thought Jenna and Caleb were about to lose a venue. Did Jenna have a venue? I don't know. Can you ask her? I could. I'm not going to yet. He looked at me over the paper. Why? Because I know what Mom will do if I call Jenna first. She'll get a warning, Dad will get a warning, everybody will agree on a version before I know what anyone else was told. Daniel set the paper down. "So what are you doing?" "Checking independent facts." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Just don't become so focused on proving the pattern that you forget Gloria is sitting somewhere wondering if her family used her." The comment irritated me for about 2 seconds because it was correct. "I know she's hurt. I know you know. I'm saying you sounded like you were interviewing a supplier." That stung because it was also correct. I had asked Gloria exact dates, exact wording, payment method, account details, all reasonable questions. But I had not once asked how she felt about any of it. I called her back that afternoon for no investigative reason at all. "I forgot to ask if you're okay," I said. Gloria gave a small laugh. "No. But I will be." That answer stayed with me. The next person I spoke to was not random. Gloria told me she had once mentioned, months earlier, that another cousin, Marianne, had also helped the kids. Gloria asked Marianne first whether she was willing to talk to me. Only after Marianne agreed did I call. Marianne lived in Tennessee and had not been invited to my wedding either. We had met maybe 4 times in my adult life. She did not follow me online and had not known my wedding date until after my father sent a few family pictures. Her story was different from Gloria's. Mom had told Marianne that Jenna and Caleb had already handled the venue but were short on their catering balance. "How much did you send?" I asked. $3,000. "Did Diane ask for that amount?" "She said they had a few thousand left to cover. I offered 3. "Did she tell you to keep it quiet?" "Yes." Same reason she always gives when Jenna needs help. She said Jenna had too much pride. I wrote down the exact phrase. "Did Thomas contact you?" "He thanked me afterward. Said they'd make sure it went where it was needed." "Do you still have that?" "I think it was a text. Please don't delete it." There was a pause. Allison, why? I gave her the same answer I had given Gloria, no more and no less. Jenna had not had a wedding at my venue. My parents had hired a photographer who had been told Jenna was the bride. I was trying to determine what had been represented to people who sent money. Marianne was quiet long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she said, Diane told me you had your own wedding handled, and Jenna was the one they were worried about. That was not yet a reveal. It was a familiar family hierarchy, dressed up as financial information. What did that mean to you? That you didn't need help. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Of course that was what it meant. I thanked her, and asked her to forward the original text thread if she could. By dinner, I had 2 donor records, 2 payment confirmations, Dad's involvement in both, and 2 different stories about what the money was supposedly for. Venue, catering, same couple, no wedding I could verify. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. Daniel saw it from across the table. You made your own. I need to separate what people were told from what I think. He pulled his chair closer. My columns were simple. Donor, date, amount, exact wording, source, known fact. Under Gloria, I entered $8,000. Venue deposit and partial catering payment. Full text thread and payment confirmation. Known fact. No Jenna, Caleb event under my venue contract. Allison, Daniel deposit already paid. Under Marianne, I entered $3,000. Catering balance. Full thread pending. Known fact. No Jenna, Caleb catering contract associated with our wedding. I deliberately left one column out. Actual use. I did not know it. That mattered. I was angry enough to imagine plenty of possibilities. Jenna's credit cards. The condo. My parents' own expenses. None of those possibilities belonged in a factual file until I had proof. By the end of the night, Marianne's messages arrived. Her thread followed the same pattern as Gloria's, but with different details. Mom talked about keeping the wedding modest. Mom said Jenna was embarrassed. Mom said the catering balance had grown after a few family additions. Dad's thank you text came later. I put the 2 threads side by side. Same secrecy, different expense. Same couple, different donor, same parents. Daniel leaned over my shoulder. How many people do you think there are? I don't know. Are you going to call everyone? No. That answer surprised him. Why not? Because I don't know who everyone is. And I'm not sending a blast saying my parents lied when I still don't know the scope. He nodded. Good. I scrolled back to Gloria's messages one more time. This time, I was not reading the wording. I was looking at dates. The first casual message from Mom was September 26th. The venue deposit message was October 19th. The payment came October 22nd. I opened my wedding planning calendar. Daniel and I had mailed our invitations in early November. I stopped. What? He asked. I pointed at the screen. Gloria sent the money before our invitations went out. So whatever Mom was doing, it wasn't something she improvised after people saw our wedding details or got confused about who was getting married. Daniel looked at the dates. I opened Marianne's thread. Her first catering message was even earlier. October 7th. Weeks before invitations, months before my wedding, months before Jenna's haircut, months before Miles pointed at me under the arch and called my sister the bride. I sat back and stared at the spreadsheet. Until that moment, part of me had still been trying to leave room for some grotesque version of misunderstanding. Maybe Mom had told people Jenna and Caleb were planning something separate. Maybe relatives had mixed up dates. Maybe the photographer stunt was a vanity project that had somehow gotten tangled with family generosity. The dates took that comfort away. By the time anyone outside our immediate family even knew the formal details of my wedding, money was already moving toward a wedding Jenna and Caleb had never held. By the following Monday, I had stopped thinking of Gloria and Marianne as isolated mistakes. 2 different relatives had been told 2 different versions of the same basic story, both involving a wedding Jenna and Caleb had never held. Both involving money, both routed through my parents. What I did not know was whether I had found the whole thing or only the edge of it. I did not start calling relatives at random. That would have been the fastest way to turn a factual problem into a family panic, and panic was exactly the environment my mother handled best. She could fill uncertainty with emotion faster than anyone I knew. If 10 people called her angry in one afternoon, she would have 10 chances to tell 10 new versions before I had the facts straight. Instead, I asked Gloria and Marianne the same question. Had either of them ever heard another relative mention helping Jenna and Caleb financially? Gloria came back first. She remembered Dad's cousin Elaine making a vague comment the previous Christmas about helping with flowers. Marianne remembered an older uncle on Mom's side saying Jenna deserved a nice start after everything she had been through. Neither woman had asked follow-up questions at the time because Diane had framed the entire situation as private. That secrecy had worked exactly the way she intended. Everyone thought they were protecting Jenna's dignity. In practice, they had been keeping each other from comparing notes. I made a second list. This one not about money, but access. Who had been invited to my wedding? Who lived near Columbus? Who followed me? Or Daniel online? Who had regular contact with Jenna? Who usually received family news through my parents? The pattern emerged almost immediately. Gloria lived several states away. Marianne was in Tennessee. Elaine spent most of the year in Arizona. One older relative on Mom's side lived in Pennsylvania and barely used social media. Another cousin communicated almost entirely through holiday cards and occasional phone calls. None of them had been on our wedding guest list. None of them was part of our close family group chat. Most were connected to me only through the broad, polite network of extended family. That mattered more than I first realized. Daniel and I had kept our wedding relatively contained. We did not have an enormous extended family affair where every second cousin and childhood neighbor expected an invitation. We invited the people we actually saw, the relatives we were genuinely close to, and the friends who had been part of our lives. Nobody in the group I was now tracing had been cut at the last minute. They simply were not close enough to be on the list. We had also asked for an unplugged ceremony, not because we were trying to create some dramatic social media embargo, but because Lena had explained how many professional ceremony shots got ruined by guests leaning into the aisle with phones. We asked people to keep their phones away during the ceremony and wait until we shared our own pictures before posting full sets online. A few friends still posted reception selfies that night, but most of our wider wedding photos did not appear until the following week. My mother did not need to keep a false wedding alive forever. She only needed a short window in which a few relatives far away could receive carefully selected pictures directly from her before they had any reason to look elsewhere. Once I understood that, Miles's role stopped looking theatrical and started looking functional. Daniel sat across from me at the dining table while I rearranged names on my list. So this wasn't about convincing the whole family. No, just the people who gave money, probably. He nodded slowly. That's a lot more believable. I know. I hated that it was. A giant lie told publicly would have been easy to expose. A small lie told privately to 6 or 7 people who rarely spoke to each other could survive for months, especially if each one believed keeping quiet was a kindness. Gloria agreed to call Elaine herself. I did not want Gloria recruiting people for me, but she said she would only ask whether Elaine had ever sent money connected to Jenna's wedding. Elaine called me that evening. She sounded embarrassed before we even got past hello. I hope Gloria didn't make this into a bigger thing than it is, she said. She didn't. I'm just trying to understand what people were told. Elaine sighed. Your mother told me they were cutting flowers because everything had gone up. I sent 2,000. Did she ask you for 2? No. She told me the florist had increased the balance and I offered. Do you remember when? Late November, maybe. Did you send it to Mom? To Thomas. He texted me the account information. I wrote that down. Did Mom tell you Jenna and Caleb had booked a venue? Yes. She said it was intimate, but beautiful. She kept saying Jenna didn't want a big production. What did she tell you about me? Elaine hesitated. I almost told her not to answer, but the hesitation was already an answer of its own. She said you had your own wedding handled. Elaine said carefully. That you and Daniel were in a much stronger position financially. That's all? Another pause. She said you didn't really understand why Jenna needed help. The wording was mild enough to sound harmless. That was Mom's specialty. She rarely had to call me selfish outright. She only had to describe Jenna as vulnerable and me as secure until everyone supplied the moral conclusion themselves. Do you still have the messages? I asked. I think so. If you're comfortable, please keep the originals. Don't delete anything. Elaine's voice sharpened. Allison, are you thinking about suing your parents? No. Then what are you doing? Trying to separate facts from what everybody assumes. That answer seemed to calm her a little. By Tuesday night, I had confirmed 5 people who had sent money. I did not yet know whether there were more. The amounts ranged from $2,000 to $8,000. The explanations varied. Venue, catering, flowers, a general wedding shortfall, a new beginning fund after the ceremony. Nobody had been told exactly the same thing. That made the pattern stronger, not weaker. My mother had not sent out one clumsy request and let people interpret it differently. She had tailored the request to the person. Gloria was practical and believed in protecting deposits. Marianne had spent years working in hospitality and understood catering costs. Elaine loved flowers and always sent arrangements for major family events. Mom had chosen the category each person was most likely to respond to. I did not know whether to call that strategic or predatory. At that point, I still refused to use either word in my notes. I stayed with dates, amounts, statements, documents. That discipline became even more important when I started comparing the relatives' claims to my own wedding invoices. Because of my job, I had preserved almost everything. The venue contract included a payment schedule and change order history. The caterer had a signed guest count adjustment and final balance. The florist had an itemized invoice for the arch, centerpieces, bouquet work, and reception arrangements. Nothing about those documents was dramatic. They were exactly the kind of boring paper trail most people stopped caring about the moment the wedding was over. For me, they became reference points. Elaine had been told in late November that Jenna and Caleb were short on flowers. At that time, my own floral contract had already been locked for weeks. The amount Mom had mentioned to Elaine was not identical to mine, but it was close enough to a real category in my wedding planning that the lie would have sounded plausible if Mom had casually repeated details she had heard from me. Marianne's catering story followed the same pattern. The number did not match my invoice exactly, but the timing lined up with the period when Daniel and I had been discussing guest count adjustments at family dinner. I remembered Mom asking what per-person increases looked like. At the time, I had thought she was being nosy. Now I wondered how many harmless questions had been research. I hated that thought because it made me suspicious of memories that had once seemed ordinary. Daniel found me staring at the florist invoice long after I had finished the comparison. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm trying to remember when I told Mom about the arch." "You mean the cost?" "The whole thing, size, flowers, setup." She knew enough to describe it. "Did you send her the invoice?" "No." "Then don't turn every conversation into evidence." I looked at him. He pulled out the chair beside me. "I'm serious. You've got actual documents. Don't start rewriting every dinner you had with your mother as part of a conspiracy just because you know what happened later." He was right, and I knew it immediately. That was another danger of being good at finding patterns. Once you believed a pattern existed, it was easy to start forcing every old detail into it. "I hate when you're reasonable," I said. "You married me anyway. Poor judgment on my part." He kissed my temple and pointed at the folder. "What can you prove?" That she knew the wedding categories, that relatives got stories tied to those categories, that money went through Mom and Dad. I still don't know where it ended up. "Then stay there." I did. The next piece came from Miles. I had not contacted him since the wedding, except to thank him for respecting Megan's instructions after the ceremony. I did not want to treat him like an investigator, and I did not want to ask him for private material unrelated to me. But his client intake directly involved my wedding venue, my family, and the confusion that had happened in front of me. I emailed him a simple request. I asked whether he would preserve the original intake form, the requested shot list, the timestamps, and any messages directly related to the planned session at my wedding. I explained that I was trying to document why he had been told Jenna was the bride. He called me instead of replying. "I've kept everything," he said. "I haven't changed the client file. Thank you. I want to be careful about what I give you. Your parents are the contracting clients." "That's fair. I can give you the intake page that identified who I was told to photograph and the shot list connected to the venue. That's directly relevant to what happened. I'm not comfortable forwarding an entire private message history without a reason." "I'm not asking you to." There was a small pause, and I could hear some tension leave his voice. "Good," he said. "I'm sorry, Allison. I've never had a booking like this." "What did you think was happening?" "I thought the family had split photography coverage. I've done that before. One photographer handles the ceremony and couple. Another handles family formals, reception candids, sometimes a second cultural event or private session." "That didn't strike you as strange? The way your mother described it?" "Not really. She said the ceremony logistics were complicated, and the main photographer would have a separate shot plan." "And Jenna?" "Her photo matched the bride field. She was the secondary contact. She asked a few timing questions." He emailed me a limited packet while we were still on the phone. The intake page was exactly as I remembered. Bride, Jenna Parker. Groom, Caleb Morris. Contracting clients, Diane and Thomas Parker. Secondary contact, Jenna Parker. The requested shots were listed below in neutral professional language. Bride solo under floral arch. Bride and groom under floral arch. Bride with parents. Couple at staircase. Couple in ballroom. Family groupings. There was no note saying, "Pretend this is Jenna's wedding." There did not need to be. The bride field already did the work. The timestamps mattered more. The first intake had been submitted in early October. The detailed shot list had been updated later. That meant my parents had not just booked Miles months in advance. They had maintained the plan. I printed the intake and put it beside my own photographer contract. 2 vendors. Sam venue. 2 different brides. Only one wedding. That visual was the first moment the situation looked as absurd on paper as it had felt under the arch. Then Miles sent one more document. A scheduling confirmation showing that his family session had been set for the pre-ceremony window before Lena's exclusive ceremony coverage began. That solved another piece. Mom's obsession with Jenna's haircut suddenly made logistical sense. If Jenna missed that slot, the ceremony started. Once the ceremony started, Lena controlled the arch area. Afterward, venue staff would transition the space. Miles had another booking and could not stay indefinitely. Mom had not been delaying my wedding because Jenna might miss a normal family photo. She had been trying to preserve a specific staged window. I remembered her exact words. "She can't be photographed like this." At the time, they had sounded vain. Now they sounded operational. The next confirmation came from someone I had not contacted at all. Dad's cousin Robert called me on Wednesday afternoon. "Elaine told me you're asking about money," he said. "That depends on what she told you. She asked if I'd sent anything to Jenna." "Did you?" $3,500. I closed my office door. "For what?" "Thomas said they were trying to close out the wedding costs and start putting money toward the condo." That was the first time anyone had linked both ideas in the same conversation. "Thomas told you that?" "Yes." Diane called first. Thomas followed up. "Do you have anything in writing?" "Some texts. Would you keep them?" "I already took screenshots." "Keep the original thread too." He laughed once without humor. "You sound like an attorney." "I'm not." "So what are you?" "Someone who wants to know what happened before deciding what it means." Robert was quiet. Then he said, "Your dad told me he was tracking it." I straightened in my chair. "Tracking what?" "All of it. Who sent what? What went to the wedding? What went to the home afterward?" My pen stopped. "Did he say how?" "He said he had a spreadsheet." The word hit me differently than it would have hit anyone else. A spreadsheet was not proof of wrongdoing. It could have been exactly what Dad claimed, an accounting tool. Thomas had always tracked money. He saved receipts for appliances long after warranties expired. He reconciled utility bills to the penny. When I was a teenager, he once returned to a grocery store because a coupon had been credited for 75 cents instead of $1. Numbers, in his mind, were order. He had a phrase he liked to use whenever Mom and I disagreed over something involving money. Numbers don't lie. I had heard him say it so many times that it had become part of the furniture of my childhood. Robert kept talking. I remember because I told him I didn't need a report. I wasn't investing. I was helping family. What did Dad say? That he wanted to make sure nobody gave more than necessary. That matched Gloria almost word for word. I thanked Robert, asked him to preserve the texts, and ended the call. For the first time since the wedding, I found myself thinking about a summer when I was 17. The memory came because of one line Diane had written to Elaine. Allison will be fine. She always finds a way. At 17, I had been accepted into a summer academic program 2 states away. It was not glamorous, but it mattered to me. I had earned a partial scholarship and spent months saving from a weekend job to cover most of the rest. My parents had promised to pay the final portion. A few weeks before the deadline, Jenna had some expense I no longer even remembered clearly. Maybe dance fees. Maybe tutoring. The exact thing was less important than the conversation. Mom told me the money they had promised me was going to Jenna instead. I argued. Dad said, "You'll figure something out." Mom said, "Jenna won't." I did figure something out. I picked up extra shifts, asked the program for a payment extension, and went. For years, I remembered that story as proof that I had always been resourceful. Sitting at my desk at 38, I saw the other lesson my family had taken from it. Every time I recovered, they treated the recovery as evidence that nothing had really been taken from me. I did not spend long in the memory. I had no interest in turning my childhood into a courtroom exhibit, but it explained why Mom's current language felt so familiar. Allison will be fine. Not Allison agreed. Not Allison offered. Allison will be fine. That phrase had always been permission. By Thursday, my factual file contained 5 confirmed donors and 1 probable 6th. The total I could verify had passed $20,000. I still did not know the final number. I still did not know exactly where the money went. More importantly, I had stopped assuming Mom was the only architect. Dad had provided payment instructions to multiple relatives. Dad had thanked people. Dad had told them he was tracking contributions. Dad had apparently separated wedding money from home money. Whatever he wanted to call his role, he was not standing outside the scheme. That realization bothered me more than I expected. With Mom, control was obvious. She inserted herself into everything and justified it as care. Dad had always presented himself differently. He was the calmer parent, the one who said, "Just let your mother have this." The one who framed himself as someone managing her intensity rather than participating in it. Now I was looking at evidence that he had built the accounting system under it. I called Gloria again that evening, not to ask for anything, but to update her on what I could confirm. "I've spoken to several people," I said. "You were not the only one told there was a wedding expense." "How many?" "5 I can verify." She exhaled. "Oh, Diane, I still don't know where the money went. What about Thomas? He handled payment instructions for more than one person." "That doesn't surprise me." It surprised me. Gloria was quiet. Then she said, "Your father has always been better at making bad decisions sound organized." I wrote that sentence nowhere. It was an opinion, not evidence. But I remembered it. Before we hung up, Gloria asked, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "You sound like you do." "I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not confronting them again until I know what they think their own records say." That night, Daniel found me closing my laptop. "No more spreadsheets?" he asked. "Not mine." He raised an eyebrow. "Apparently Dad has one." Daniel sat down across from me. "You're kidding." "No." "What's on it?" "I don't know." "You think he'll show you?" I thought about Thomas. About his love of order. About the way he trusted numbers more than memory, tone, or emotion. About how often he had used documentation to end family arguments. "If he thinks it proves he did nothing wrong," I said, "yes." Daniel leaned back. "And if it doesn't?" Then I want to see whether he understands that before I do. I did not have to wait long. The next morning, Robert forwarded me the text he had mentioned. It was from Dad. I've got a spreadsheet for what goes to the wedding and what goes to the home afterward. Diane and I are keeping everything straight. I read it twice, then once more. For nearly 2 weeks, I had been building my own record from the outside. Somewhere, my father had been building one from the inside. I waited until Saturday to ask Jenna to meet me, because I wanted the conversation to happen without Mom, Dad, or Caleb sitting beside her. By then, I had enough documents to know that my parents had told several relatives they were helping pay for a wedding that did not exist. I also knew Jenna had been listed as Miles's bride and secondary contact months before my actual wedding. What I did not know was the part that mattered most to me before I decided what kind of relationship I still had with my sister. Whether Jenna had been manipulated into the arrangement, or whether she had knowingly participated in it. I chose a coffee shop near her apartment instead of my house. I did not want Mom showing up if Jenna panicked and called her, and I did not want Daniel dragged into a conversation that belonged between the two of us. Jenna arrived 12 minutes late wearing sunglasses, even though we were sitting inside. She took them off only after she sat down and looked around the room as if checking who might hear us. "You made this sound serious," she said. "It is." She immediately looked defensive. "If this is about the wedding again, Mom already told me you're making it into something bigger than it was." That was useful before I had even asked a question. "What did she tell you I was making bigger?" Jenna's mouth tightened. "The photographer thing, the dress, all of it. I haven't told Mom what I know. She knows you're calling people. Did she tell you who?" "No." "Good." Jenna leaned back. "Why are you talking to relatives behind everyone's back?" I almost smiled at the choice of words. "Because apparently that's how everyone was already talking." She looked away. I placed nothing on the table. No printed messages, no folders, no dramatic stack of evidence. If Jenna was going to tell me the truth, I wanted to know what she would say before she knew exactly what I could prove. "Did Mom tell people you and Caleb were having a wedding at my venue?" I asked. Jenna's eyes came back to mine. "No. It was too fast." "Did she tell people you were having a wedding somewhere else?" "I don't know what she told people." "Did you know she was telling relatives you needed money for a wedding?" "I knew she talked to people." "That isn't what I asked." Jenna exhaled sharply. "Allison, you always do this." "Do what?" "Turn everything into an interview." I let that pass. "Did you know relatives were sending money because they thought you and Caleb were paying for a wedding?" She picked up her coffee even though she had not taken a sip since sitting down. "I thought people were giving us gifts." "Normal gifts?" "Yes. Before a wedding that never happened?" Her fingers tightened around the cup. "We are engaged. People give engagement gifts. $8,000? She blinked. That was the first moment I knew I had reached something real. I did not tell her who had sent it. I asked, "Would you call $8,000 a normal engagement gift?" Jenna put the cup down. "I don't know what people can afford." "You knew someone sent that much?" "I didn't say that." "You reacted to the amount." She stared at me. "This is exactly what I mean. You think because you do contracts all day, everybody is a witness you can trap." That irritated me more than I wanted it to, but I kept my voice even. "I'm not trapping you. I'm giving you a chance to tell me what happened." She laughed once. "A chance?" "Yes. To confess? If Mom pulled you into something and you didn't understand the full story, tell me now." Jenna's expression changed. Not completely. She did not soften. But for the first time, the anger slipped enough for uncertainty to show beneath it. I leaned forward. "I mean that. If she told relatives something you didn't know about, if she used your name, if she told you people were helping with the condo and left out, why? Tell me. I will distinguish between being used and choosing to participate." For several seconds, Jenna said nothing. I could see her deciding. That was the part I remembered later. Not because I could read her mind, but because I watched the options move across her face. She looked at the window, then at her phone, then back at me. She had an opening wide enough to walk through without me dragging her. Instead, she said, "There's nothing else." "Nothing?" "No, I swear." I thought they were normal gifts. Mom handled everything. I sat back. The disappointment was quieter than anger. I had expected Jenna to minimize. I had expected her to blame Mom. I had not expected her to look me directly in the face after I offered her a way to separate herself from the scheme and close it herself. Okay, I said. She seemed thrown by that. Okay? Yes. You believe me? I said okay. That doesn't answer me. No, it doesn't. Her face hardened again. You already decided I'm guilty. I haven't decided anything I can't support. There. That. You sound like you're preparing a case. I'm trying to understand why relatives gave money for a wedding that never existed. Maybe because they wanted to help us. That would be fine if they knew what they were helping with. You don't know what they knew. I'm finding out. Jenna looked disgusted. Of course you are. There was something almost familiar in her tone. The version of me our family often preferred when I was inconvenient, cold, suspicious, too competent to be generous. She folded her arms. You always act like I'm irresponsible. I didn't bring up your finances. You didn't have to. Then why are you? Because this started with the condo. The sentence landed cleanly. I had not mentioned the condo. I had not told her I had begun matching dates. I did not react quickly enough to hide that I noticed. Jenna immediately seemed to realize she had said too much. Mom told me you were upset about it. I wasn't upset. I said no. You refused to help us. I refused to become responsible for your mortgage. You make it sound like we asked you to buy the place. You asked me to become a non-occupant co-borrower because your debt-to-income ratio was a problem. That means my credit would have been tied to the loan. I said no because I would have been responsible for debt on a property I didn't own or control. Caleb would have paid it. Then you didn't need me. She opened her mouth, then shut it. I kept my tone level. This conversation is not about whether you deserved a condo. It always comes back to what you think I deserve. No. It comes back to whether people gave money because they were told the truth. Jenna stared at me for a long moment. You know what Mom says about you. I'm sure I'll find out. She says you think because you never needed help, nobody else should. There was enough truth in the accusation to make it sting. I had thought things like that about Jenna. Not exactly those words, but close. I had watched her get rescued from late payments, bad purchases, jobs she quit without plans, and decisions everybody else was expected to absorb. I had judged her for it, sometimes fairly, sometimes without much compassion. But judgment was not the same thing as consent. I think adults should know what they're agreeing to, I said. If someone wants to help you pay debt, fine. If someone wants to help you buy a condo, fine. If someone thinks they're paying for a wedding venue and the money goes somewhere else, that's different. You don't know that happened. Then tell me it didn't. I already did. No. You told me you thought they were normal gifts. She pushed her chair back slightly. I'm done. Then we're done. That annoyed her more than if I had tried to stop her. Jenna stood, picked up her purse, and stared down at me. You're going to destroy this family over money that people voluntarily gave. I haven't asked anyone for $1. You know what I mean. No, I think that's the problem. She left without finishing her coffee. I stayed another 10 minutes because I did not trust myself to drive immediately. Not because I was devastated by the argument. I was angry at myself for wanting her answer to have been different. I had told Daniel I would not decide Jenna's role before I had evidence. I meant it. But I had also wanted the meeting to give me an innocent explanation strong enough to believe. Instead, Jenna had connected the scheme to the condo before I had mentioned it and then sworn she knew nothing. That was not enough to call her an active participant. It was enough to make me stop giving her the benefit of assumptions. When I got home, Daniel was cleaning out the garage. He took one look at me and set down the box in his hands. How bad? She denied knowing. You believe her? No. Because? She knew the condo mattered before I brought it up. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. That's suspicious, not proof. I know. He smiled slightly. I hate that I don't even have to remind you anymore. I'm growing. Terrifying. I told him about the conversation in the kitchen while he made sandwiches. When I got to the point where Jenna said I thought no one deserved help because I had never needed any, he stopped. Do you think that? Sometimes. He waited. I sighed. I think she's been rescued enough that she doesn't always understand consequences. I think Mom made that worse. And yes, sometimes I look at Jenna and think she could fix half her problems if she stopped expecting somebody else to absorb them. That sounds different from thinking she never deserves help. It doesn't sound particularly kind. Kind isn't the same as inaccurate. I looked at him. You're supposed to be the emotionally balanced one. I am. That's why I'm telling you two things can be true. You can judge her too harshly sometimes, and she can still be lying to you. That stayed with me. I did not want this story to become cleaner than the people in it. I was not the flawless older sister who had never privately resented the attention Jenna received. I had resented it. I had sometimes felt superior because I could handle things she could not. Independence had become part of my identity. And there were times I wore it like moral proof. But none of that changed what relatives had been told. That afternoon, Gloria called. I remembered something, she said. What? I found Jenna's thank you message. I sat down. What thank you message? After I sent the money, your mother told me not to contact Jenna about it, so I didn't mention it first. But Jenna texted me a few days later. Do you still have it? Yes. Can you send the whole exchange? I already forwarded it. The message arrived while we were still on the phone. I opened it. Jenna's first text was simple. Mom told me what you did for us. Thank you. I can't believe you helped with the venue. It means more than you know. Gloria's reply said she was happy to help and hoped everything worked out. Jenna answered, It will. Please don't say anything to the rest of the family yet. Mom wants us to keep the wedding details quiet until everything is settled. I read it twice. Then I asked Gloria, Did Jenna ever later tell you there wasn't a wedding? No. Did she ever say you misunderstood what the money was for? No. Did she thank you for anything else? Condo, debt? General gift? No. I looked at the message again. It did not prove Jenna knew every lie Mom had told. It proved something narrower and more important. She knew Gloria believed $8,000 had helped with a venue, and she reinforced that belief. Gloria, thank you. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. I know. I just wish she had been honest with you. I did too. After we hung up, I printed the exchange and put it in the Jenna section of my file. Daniel came up behind me. That's enough for you? To prove she knew what Gloria believed, yes. To prove she knew all of it? No. He nodded. I looked at the page for another minute. The meeting at the coffee shop changed meaning in retrospect. I had asked Jenna if she knew relatives thought they were helping pay for a wedding. She had said she thought they were normal gifts. But months earlier, she had thanked Gloria specifically for helping with the venue. That was not confusion. That was a lie she told me 4 hours earlier. I did not call Jenna back. I did not text her a picture of the message. I wanted to know whether there was anything else before I let her start adjusting her story to fit what I had. The next piece came from Miles 2 days later. His email subject line was simple: relevant scheduling message. I had previously asked him to preserve anything directly related to the planned session. He had been cautious, appropriately, because my parents were the contracting clients. After reviewing the file and speaking with his business advisor, he told me he was willing to provide limited records tied specifically to the session that had created the conflict at my wedding. He was not handing me every message he had exchanged with my family. I did not want every message. The record he sent showed Jenna using the portal access Mom had given her months earlier. Jenna, will the floral arch still be open around 11:30? Mom wants to make sure we get the family shots before they move everything. Miles, yes. My current slot is 11:20, 11:50. After that, the primary team has priority for ceremony setup and coverage. Jenna, good. Mom needs some really good ones for the relatives who helped, so I don't want us rushed. Miles, understood. Are we still doing the couple frames with Caleb? Jenna, yes. He thinks they're basically engagement, family pictures, which is easier. Just tell us where to stand. I stopped reading. There were only a few more logistical lines beneath it, nothing dramatic. Hair timing. where to meet, which staircase was accessible before guests entered. The important part had already happened. Mom needs some really good ones for the relatives who helped. Caleb thinks they're basically engagement, family pictures. Jenna did not just know relatives had sent money. She knew the pictures were for them. She also knew Caleb did not understand the same thing she did. Daniel read the exchange over my shoulder. Well, he said. Yeah. That's not vague. No. What are you going to do? I closed the email. I'm going to stop asking whether Jenna was dragged into it. He did not argue. That night, for the first time since the wedding, I let myself feel angry at Jenna without correcting the emotion. Until then, most of my anger had been directed at Mom and Dad because they had created the structure. They had talked to relatives. Dad had handled payment instructions. Mom had hired Miles and entered Jenna as the bride. Jenna had been easier to place in a gray area because our parents had spent our whole lives placing her in one. She needed help. She did not understand. Mom took over. To handle it. Jenna was overwhelmed. There was always a sentence that pushed responsibility one chair away from her. The portal message removed that chair. She knew Mom wanted the pictures for relatives who had helped. She knew Caleb thought they were engagement pictures. She knew enough to ask when the floral arch would be available. And when I sat across from her and said, "If Mom dragged you into something, tell me now," she looked me in the face and said there was nothing else. I still did not know where every dollar went. I still did not know exactly how far back the plan reached. But I no longer needed to protect Jenna from being accurately described as someone who had participated. The problem was Caleb. I had no intention of calling him and announcing that his fiancée had lied to him. That was not my job. And I was not interested in using somebody's relationship as leverage against my sister. I also knew his name had been used. He was listed as the groom in Miles's file. He had been expected to stand under my wedding arch. Money had been raised in connection with a wedding involving him. At some point, he had a right to know enough to ask his own questions. I did not have to make that decision. Jenna made it for me. The following evening, my phone rang while Daniel and I were finishing dinner. Caleb. I looked at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hey, Allison. His voice sounded strained. Do you have a minute? Yes. I'm trying to understand something, and Jenna is telling me everybody is exaggerating. I did not say anything. He continued. She told me your mom asked some relatives for help. That part I knew in a general way. I thought it was mostly gifts toward the condo. What are you asking me? Did people actually think they were paying for our wedding? I chose my words carefully. Some did. How many? I'm not going to give you other people's information without their permission. Okay. Fair. He paused. Did Gloria? Yes. For what? You need to ask Jenna. His breathing changed slightly. I did. What did she say? That Gloria knew it was just general help. I looked at the printed message on the table beside my laptop. Mom told me what you did for us. Thank you. I can't believe you helped with the venue. I could have read it to him. I did not. Instead, I said, ask Jenna what Gloria's money was for. Allison. I'm serious. Ask her that exact question. Do you know the answer? I know what Gloria was told. I know what Jenna thanked her for. Jenna needs to tell you what she knew. There was a long pause. Was I supposed to be in fake wedding pictures? The question was so direct that I almost answered emotionally. I stopped myself. You were scheduled for couple portraits under the arch. That's not what I asked. I know. Did Jenna know why? I have a record showing she knew your understanding was that they were engagement-style pictures. He swore quietly. I added, Caleb, I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm telling you what I can support. I get it. I was not sure he did. Talk to her. I'm going to. We ended the call. Daniel watched me set the phone down. That sounded bad. He asked whether the pictures were fake wedding pictures. What did you say? The truth I could prove. Daniel nodded. And now? Now nothing. I meant it. I did not call Jenna to warn her. I did not send Caleb documents. I did not text Mom. For once, the next consequence was not mine to manage. About 20 minutes later, Jenna called me. I let it ring. Then Caleb called again. I answered. His voice was quieter than before. She's here. I said nothing. In the background, I could hear Jenna say, "Put it on speaker." Caleb did. "Allison," Jenna said. "Tell him." Gloria knew she was helping us generally. I looked at Daniel. He sat down across from me but stayed silent. "I'm not going to say something I know isn't true." Jenna's voice sharpened. "You don't know what Gloria knew. I have her messages. She could have misunderstood Mom. I have your message too. Silence. The kind that confirms more than an argument can." Caleb spoke next. "What message?" Jenna said quickly. "It doesn't mean what she thinks. I did not rescue her." Caleb asked, "Did you know Gloria thought she was paying for our wedding?" Jenna did not answer. He asked again, slower this time. "Did you know Gloria thought she was paying for our wedding?" And Jenna stayed silent long enough that none of us needed to pretend the question was complicated. The morning after the call with Caleb and Jenna, Mom texted me before 8. "We need to talk as a family. Your father has records that will clear this up." I read the message twice, then showed it to Daniel over coffee. "He has records," Daniel said. "That sounds promising. Or dangerous. For them? For everyone." I already knew Dad had a spreadsheet. Robert had mentioned it. What I did not know was what Dad thought it proved. That mattered. Because Thomas Parker was not the kind of man who waved paper around for effect. If he was volunteering documentation, he believed it supported his version of events. Mum sent un second message. "Tonight. Our house. Jenna will be there." I replied with one line. "Daniel is coming with me." Mom responded almost immediately. "This is family business." I typed back. "He is my husband. He is family." She did not answer. Daniel glanced at my phone. "I'm guessing that went well." She stopped texting. "So, better than usual." I spent the day at work doing my actual job, which helped more than I expected. Reviewing supplier terms and comparing a revised bid against an older scope gave my brain somewhere objective to go. At 5, I shut my laptop, printed nothing, and left every folder I had built at home. Daniel noticed when we got into the car. "No evidence bag?" "No." "You're going to their house empty-handed?" "They asked for the meeting. Dad says he has records that clear everything up. I want to know what he chooses to show me without seeing what I already have." Daniel nodded. "That is either very smart or very irritating. To them, to everyone." Mom opened the door before we knocked. She had clearly been waiting. Dad was already at the dining table with his laptop open. Jenna sat at the far end, arms folded tightly across her chest. Caleb was not there. I did not ask why. Mom did not offer coffee. That alone told me how she thought the evening should go. "We are ending this tonight," she said. Daniel and I sat together on one side of the table. I looked at Dad. "You said you have records." He tapped the laptop. "I do." Mom jumped in first. "Your father has kept track of every dollar anyone sent. Nobody stole anything. Nobody pocketed anything. You have been calling relatives and making it sound like we were running some kind of scheme. I haven't told anyone what to call it. You told Gloria there was no wedding. There wasn't. There was going to be one." Jenna shifted in her chair. That sentence caught my attention, but Dad cut in before I could ask. "Deanne." Mom looked at him. "Let me show her." He turned the laptop toward me. A spreadsheet filled the screen. The first thing I noticed was how familiar it looked. Not because I had seen that exact file before, but because Dad had been organizing money this way for as long as I could remember. Frozen header row. Short codes. Dates formatted consistently. Totals at the bottom. No decoration. No long comments. Everything built for quick scanning. Daniel leaned slightly closer. Dad said, "This is what I've been using to track the family contributions." "Family contributions to what?" I asked. "To Jenna and Caleb." That wasn't my question. His jaw tightened. "To help them get established." "Then why did people think they were paying for a wedding?" Mom sighed loudly. "Because weddings and starting a home happen at the same time, Allison. Normal families don't divide every dollar into legal categories." "I'm asking Dad." Dad turned the screen a little farther toward me. The columns read, "Source. Amount. Family note. Received. Transfer. Destination. The source column did not use full names. Mostly initials. G, P, Me, Le, E, R, RP. I recognized Gloria immediately. Marianne next. Elaine. Robert. The family note column contained codes. Enfant. Cat. Fleur. Home. New. The destination column had a different set. JCC. Reserve. Rem. Misc. I pointed to the screen. What does ven mean? Venu. Cat. Catering. Fleur. Flowers. Mom spoke over him. Those are just shorthand for what people mentioned when they sent money. I looked at Dad. And JCC? He hesitated just long enough to matter. Jenna credit card. Jenna looked away. Reserve? Money held for the condo. Rame? Dad sat back. Reimbursement. To whom? To us. For what? Expenses we already covered for Jenna. Daniel did not move beside me, but I could feel the change in him. I scrolled down. Gloria's row showed $8,000. Then, in the family note column. Received October 22nd. 2 transfers afterward. Part to JCC, part to reserve. Marianne's $3,000 showed CAT, then Ream. Elaine's $2,000 showed FLR, then JCC. Robert's $3,500 was divided between home and reserve. I looked up. Dad had the expression of someone who believed he had just demonstrated transparency. What exactly is this supposed to clear up? I asked. That every dollar was accounted for. I didn't ask whether you accounted for it. That is the point. No, the point is what people were told before they gave it. Mom pushed her chair back slightly. They gave money to help Jenna. Gloria was told venue. And it helped Jenna. Marianne was told catering. It helped Jenna. Elaine was told flowers. It helped Jenna. That is not the same thing. Dad closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. You are getting hung up on labels. I stared at him. They weren't labels to the people writing the checks. They were all helping the same household. No, they were making decisions based on specific expenses. Mom threw up her hands. This is why nobody can talk to you. Everything becomes a contract. I ignored her and pointed back to Gloria's row. Did Gloria know part of her money was going to Jenna's credit card? Dad said nothing. Did she? She knew she was helping Jenna. That is not what I asked. Mom snapped. You don't get to interrogate your father in his own house. I turned to her. Then he should stop presenting evidence he doesn't want questions about. Dad lifted one hand. Enough. For a moment, the room went quiet. He looked at me instead of Mom. Nobody took money for themselves. You reimbursed yourselves. For money we had already spent on Jenna. Did the donors know that? They knew the money was for Jenna. Again, not what I asked. Dad's voice hardened. Nobody lost anything they weren't willing to give. That sentence landed harder than Mom shouting ever could. I looked at him for several seconds. Then I said, they were willing to give it for something that didn't exist. Dad shook his head. That is dramatic. Was there a Jenna and Caleb wedding venue? They were planning a wedding. That is not what I asked. They are engaged. That is not what I asked. His face changed because he understood I was not going to let him move the question. No, he said finally. There wasn't a separate venue contract. Was there a catering contract? No. Florist? No. Then Gloria gave $8,000 because Mom told her Jenna was about to lose a venue that didn't exist. Mom slammed her palm flat against the table. She gave $8,000 because she loves this family. I turned to her. Then why didn't you ask her for $8,000 to pay Jenna's credit card? Because she wouldn't have understood. The room went still. Mom realized what she had said almost immediately. Daniel looked at me. Jenna stared at Mom. Dad's shoulders lost, as if he had been hoping she would not say that part out loud. I asked, wouldn't have understood what? Mom recovered fast. She always did. She wouldn't have understood why helping with debt mattered just as much as helping with a wedding. That sounds like you knew she was making the decision based on the wedding. She wanted to help. You wanted the money. I wanted Jenna to have a chance. There it was. Not denial. Not misunderstanding. Just justification. I looked back at the spreadsheet. Dad must have mistaken my silence for movement in his direction, because he leaned forward. Allison, you are looking at this like there was a victim and there wasn't. Gloria gave money voluntarily. Marianne gave money voluntarily. Elaine did too. We never forced anyone. You gave them false reasons. We gave them context. You gave them fictional expenses. We gave them a reason to help Jenna when they otherwise would have asked 1,000 questions. Daniel spoke for the first time. That's called changing the decision by changing the information. Dad turned toward him. This is between us. Daniel's voice stayed calm. You used my wedding too. Mom scoffed. Oh, please. He looked at her. You hired a photographer to make your younger daughter look like the bride at the wedding Allison and I paid for. You weren't paying Miles. No. We were paying for the venue, the arch, the room, the day, the setup, the schedule, and the actual wedding you wanted to use as background. Mom's mouth tightened. Daniel sat back. I'm not taking over the conversation. I'm reminding you that this did not happen in a vacuum. I was grateful he stopped there. I turned back to Dad. What does MISC mean? Miscellaneous support. Zuchas? Household expenses. Some medical copays. A car repair. I looked at Jenna. She had said almost nothing. Did you know Gloria's money went partly to your credit card? Her eyes narrowed. Mom and Dad handle that stuff. That is not an answer. I knew they paid some things. Did you know Gloria thought she was helping save a venue? She looked at Mom. I had already seen that reflex once at the coffee shop. This time, Mom spoke for her. She already told you she didn't know all the details. I looked at Jenna. I'm not asking Mom. Jenna finally said, I knew Gloria helped with wedding stuff. You thanked her for the venue. Her expression hardened. Because that's what Mom told me to say. Daniel shifted beside me. I felt my anger rise, but the claim itself mattered more. Mom told you to send that message? Yes. When? I don't remember. Before or after Gloria sent the money? After, obviously. Did Mom tell you why Gloria thought there was a venue? No. Did you ask? Jenna rolled her eyes. Why would I? Because someone had sent $8,000, I thought. Because any normal adult might want to know what another person believed they were paying for. But I did not say that. I said, what about Miles? What about him? You messaged him that Mom needed good pictures for relatives who had helped. Because she did. And you knew Caleb thought they were engagement pictures. Yes. Why? Because Mom said calling them wedding pictures would make him uncomfortable. Daniel looked at her sharply. Mom said he would have overreacted. I stared at all three of them. That was the pattern in miniature. Gloria would not have understood. Caleb would have overreacted. Relatives would have asked too many questions. I would have said no. Every person who might resist simply needed to receive a different version. The common thread was not money. It was consent. Mom did not want anyone deciding based on the full truth, because she already knew some of us would decide differently. I looked at Dad's spreadsheet again. What's the total? Dad's lips pressed together. I can add. He turned the laptop back toward himself, clicked a cell, then turned it toward me again. $32,500. The number was worse than I had expected, and somehow less surprising than it should have been. Daniel exhaled slowly. Jenna stared at the table. Mom crossed her arms. Spread over months, as if that makes it smaller. It means no one person was pressured. I pointed to Gloria's row. $8,000 from a retired relative is not small. She offered it. After you told her Jenna was about to lose a wedding venue. Mom looked away. I scrolled to the earliest date. October 4th. My chest tightened. The date was familiar. Not because of the wedding. Because of the condo. I pulled out my phone. Mom's expression changed. What are you doing? Checking something. I opened my text history with Jenna and searched. The lender conversation had happened in late September. I had met Jenna and Caleb at a coffee shop to look at what they were being asked to do to qualify. They needed a stronger borrower profile. Jenna had asked whether I would become a non-occupant co-borrower. I told them no that night. I found the message afterward. September 29th. Jenna, Mom says you're being ridiculous. Caleb and I wouldn't miss payments. Me, I'm not signing onto a mortgage I don't control. Then Mom's message the next morning. You're making your sister's life harder to prove a point. I looked back at Dad's spreadsheet. First donation conversation coded Ven. October 4th. 5 days later. I turned the phone around. Is this when it started? Dad looked at the dates. Mom did not. That told me enough. I asked again. Did you start calling relatives after I refused the condo? Dad looked at Mom. She lifted her chin. I started asking family to help because you wouldn't. There was no point pretending I had not heard the accusation buried inside the sentence. You asked family to help Jenna. Or you asked them to replace me. Mom's eyes flashed. You always make it about yourself. You linked it to my refusal, because your refusal was selfish. Daniel said, Allison was asked to take responsibility for a mortgage on a property she wouldn't own. Mom turned on him. She could afford the risk. That sentence made me laugh once, quietly. Mom frowned. What is funny? You still think that's the standard. What standard? If I can survive the loss, you think you're entitled to ask me to absorb it. That's not what I said. It's what you've been saying my entire life. Dad shifted. We are not turning this into childhood. I'm not. I'm talking about the exact logic you're using now. Mom shook her head. You have always had more options than Jenna. I built more options. You think that makes you better than her. No, I think it means my options belong to me. Mom's face tightened in a way I knew well. The conversation had moved beyond facts into the place where she believed motherhood gave her moral ownership over everything her children had. You had the credit, she said. You had the income. You had Daniel. Jenna needed one break, so you told people I refused to help her. You did refuse. You told them why? I told them you could help and chose not to. That's not the same as telling them I was being asked to put my credit on a mortgage. They wouldn't care about the technical details. There it was again. Technical details. The truth, stripped of the parts that might change somebody's decision. I sat back. Dad closed the laptop halfway. I think this meeting is done. No, Mom said. She needs to understand something. Dad looked tired now. Diane. Mom ignored him. She looked directly at me. You have spent years acting like saying no makes you morally superior. You say no to loans. No to helping Jenna. No to letting us contribute unless it's on your terms. Then you stand there and call everyone else irresponsible. I felt the accusation hit somewhere deeper than I wanted it to. Not because it was entirely false. I had judged Jenna. I had been impatient with Mom. I did prefer control because control kept other people from making decisions with my money. But there was a difference Mom never seemed willing to recognize. I don't think saying no makes me better, I said. I think it makes my yes mean something. She stared at me. If I help someone, I continued, I choose it. I know what I'm helping with. I know the risk. Gloria didn't get that choice. Marianne didn't. Elaine didn't. Caleb didn't even know what the pictures were for. You keep calling this family help, but every time somebody might have said no, you changed the information until they could say yes. Jenna muttered. You're making us sound like criminals. I looked at her. I haven't used that word. Not yet. No, not yet. Dad reopened the laptop, then shut it fully. I gave you the records because I thought you wanted facts. I do. And now you're twisting them. I'm reading them. You are assuming the worst possible motive. I'm not assuming motive. I'm looking at what happened. He pushed the laptop away. The money went to Jenna. Correct? It paid real expenses. Correct. People wanted to help. Correct. He seemed almost relieved. Then I continued. They were told false wedding expenses. Also correct. His jaw tightened. You knew what each donor was told because you coded it. You tracked the incoming money. You moved it somewhere else. That is what your own spreadsheet shows. Dad stared at me. For the first time that night, he did not have a clean answer. Mom did. You know what your problem is? She said. I almost smiled. I suspect you're about to tell me. You have never forgiven Jenna for needing more. The line was designed to move the discussion again, away from documents and toward my character. I could have followed her there. I did not. Maybe I have resented it, I said. That surprised her. I continued. Maybe I've been impatient. Maybe I've thought she should handle more herself. We can talk about that another day. None of it changes what Gloria was told. Mom looked almost angry that I would not defend myself. Daniel's hand rested lightly against my knee under the table. I stood. We're leaving. Dad looked up. That's it? For tonight. Mom stood too. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Are you going to give that spreadsheet to everyone? I haven't decided what records anyone needs. Dad's face hardened. It's my document. You showed it to me voluntarily. I did not give you permission to copy it. I didn't copy it. He looked briefly at my phone. I held it up. I didn't photograph it either. That seemed to surprise him. I had written down the total and some codes on a notepad while we talked, but I did not need to steal his file. The point was not to trap Dad through possession. The point was that I now knew the record existed and what he believed it meant. Mom followed us toward the front door. You are punishing Jenna because you wouldn't help her. I turned around. No, Jenna is an adult. If she benefited from money people gave under false information, she'll have to deal with whatever that means. I'm not creating that. You could stop all of this. I could lie about what happened. That isn't what I said. It's what you keep asking everyone else to do. Mom's face went flat. Daniel opened the door. Dad stayed in the dining room. Jenna never said goodbye. We drove home in silence for almost 10 minutes before Daniel spoke. That spreadsheet was worse than I expected. It was cleaner than I expected. He glanced at me. Meaning? He built it like he thought organization made the underlying thing legitimate. Do you think he actually believes that? I think he believes if money went somewhere useful, the reason people gave it stops mattering. Daniel was quiet for a moment. And your mom? She knew the reason mattered. That's why she changed it. That distinction stayed with me all the way home. Dad had rationalized. Mom had designed. Jenna had benefited and participated. Different roles. Same result. When we got home, I opened my own factual ledger and added only what I could support from the meeting. Thomas displayed a spreadsheet tracking donor sources, amounts, stated family note categories, transfers, and destination codes. Verified total shown, $32,500. Destinations included Jenna credit card payments, condo reserve, reimbursements to Diane and Thomas, and miscellaneous support. First track donor entry, October 4th. Allison refused non-occupant co-borrower request. September 20. 9th. I stopped there. No adjectives. No conclusion. At 11:16 that night, Gloria texted me. I almost ignored it until morning, but the preview showed a sentence with my name. Found an older message from Diane. I think you need to see this. I opened it. The message was dated October 3rd, the day before Dad's first tracked donor entry. Diane had written to Gloria, I hate asking anyone, but Jenna needs family right now. Allison could help, but she won't. I'm done begging her to care about her sister. I read it once. Then again, the timing was too clean to dismiss. 5 days after I refused to attach my credit to Jenna's mortgage, Mom had started telling relatives that my boundary was proof I did not care. And the very next day, Dad's spreadsheet began. The message Gloria sent me that night did more damage than the $32,000 total ever had. Money was measurable. I knew how to look at it, categorize it, trace where it had supposedly gone, and separate what I could prove from what I could not. Mom's sentence about me was different. It was not an expense code or a transfer. It was a story, and unlike Dad's spreadsheet, I had no way to calculate how many people had heard some version of it before I ever knew it existed. Allison could help, but she won't. I'm done begging her to care about her sister. The next morning, I asked Gloria whether she had anything else like that. I did not ask her to hunt for ammunition. I asked only whether Mom had discussed me in connection with Jenna's money. Gloria called instead of texting. I found a few things, she said. I'm not sure you're going to like them. That hasn't stopped this story yet. She did not laugh. She forwarded the original message thread while we were on the phone. Mom had not called me cruel. That would have been easier. She had done something more effective. Allison and Daniel are doing very well. Their wedding is completely handled. Another message, weeks later. I just wish Allison understood that not every child lands on her feet the same way. Then, she thinks saying no teaches Jenna responsibility. I think family should help before someone has to fail first. There was nothing hysterical in any of it. No obvious smear campaign. Mom had built a version of me that was technically adjacent to reality, and morally distorted just enough to make the rest of her story easier to accept. Yes, Daniel and I were doing well. Yes, I had refused the mortgage request. Yes, I believed Jenna should take more responsibility for her finances. Mom simply removed every detail that might have changed how those statements felt. She did not say I would have been legally responsible for a mortgage on a property I did not own. She did not say Jenna already carried substantial consumer debt. She did not say Daniel and I had paid our own wedding costs instead of asking family to absorb them. She did not say I had offered Jenna other kinds of help before, and had stopped when those offers repeatedly turned into requests for cash or credit. Mom gave people enough truth to make the lie around it feel fair. Gloria cleared her throat. There's one from Thomas too. Send it. His message was shorter. Allison has always been independent. Jenna isn't built the same way. We're trying to balance that. I stared at the word balance. Of course, Dad would call it that. Not favoritism. Not rescue. Balance? I asked. Did you ever ask what he meant? No. I thought he meant emotionally. Why did you send money? Because your mother made it sound like Jenna was about to lose something important, and you were choosing not to help even though it would have been easy for you. I wrote nothing down for several seconds. Would you have sent the $8,000 if she had told you the money was partly for credit cards and partly for a condo reserve? Gloria answered immediately. No. There was the consent problem again, clean and simple. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For believing her version about you. I looked out my office window. You didn't invent it. That doesn't mean I had to believe it. She gave you a version designed to be believable. That sounds like you defending me. It isn't. It's me being accurate. Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You really do sound like your father sometimes. That stopped me, not because she meant it as an insult. I could hear that she did not. Still, I did not like it. After we hung up, I asked the other relatives I had already spoken with one narrow question. Had Mom or Dad discussed my refusal to help Jenna when asking them for money? I did not contact anyone new. I did not expand the circle. The answers came back over the next 2 days. Marianne sent me a message from Mom that said I had always preferred letting people solve their own problems. Elaine had been told I had plenty of room financially, but did not believe in supporting Jenna's choices. Robert remembered Dad saying I was very strict about money and that he and Mom were trying to make sure Jenna did not suffer because of it. Again, none of those statements was completely invented. That almost made them worse. My parents had not needed to create a fictional Allison. They had simply selected the pieces that made their own behavior look generous. By Wednesday night, I had read the messages too many times. Daniel knew it before I admitted it. We were sitting on the couch with the television on mute while I scrolled back through Gloria's thread. He looked over from his laptop. You've read that one already. I know. Several times. I know. He closed his laptop. You okay? I'm fine. He waited. I hated when he did that because silence made it harder to defend a bad answer. I'm not surprised Mom talked about me, I said. That wasn't what I asked. I don't care what distant relatives think about my financial boundaries. Daniel leaned back. Then why are you rereading the messages? I looked at him. He was not accusing me. That made it harder. I'm checking wording. No, you're not. I almost snapped at him. Almost. Instead, I locked my phone. Fine. It bothers me. That seems reasonable. I don't like that people thought I could have fixed Jenna's life and just chose not to. Also reasonable. I especially don't like that part of me wants to send everybody the mortgage details just to prove I wasn't being selfish. Daniel nodded. That part sounds more like you. I glared at him. He smiled slightly. I mean the part where you want to correct the record. I have the record. I know. I could send one email and end the argument. To who? Everyone Mom talked to. Do you know everyone she talked to? No. Do they all need your financial details? I did not answer. He continued. And is the real problem that they misunderstood you or that your parents used that misunderstanding to get what they wanted? I looked down at my phone. That is annoyingly specific. I've had practice. I leaned back against the couch. Being able to handle something doesn't mean it didn't hurt you, he said. The sentence hit exactly where I did not want it to. For most of my life, I had treated being unaffected as evidence of strength. If Mom redirected money, I found another way. If Jenna's crisis took over a family event, I adjusted. If Dad said I was overreacting, I stopped explaining. Eventually, people began assuming I did not need explanation, apology, or consideration because I would recover anyway. I had helped create that impression. Not the entitlement behind it, not the lies, but I had spent years insisting I did not care whenever caring felt like losing. I don't want this to become about proving I'm the better daughter, I said. Good. I also don't want them getting to tell people I caused all of this because I said no. That part won't survive the documents. You sound very confident. I married a woman who keeps supplier correspondence for years. That is not romantic. I thought it was one of your better qualities. The next morning, before work, I drafted an email. I did not send it. The subject line was family financial misrepresentations. That alone should have warned me I was not emotionally neutral. I attached the timeline. I attached screenshots of Mom's messages about me. I attached the wedding contracts. I wrote a clean summary explaining that Jenna and Caleb had not held a wedding at our venue, that Daniel and I had never requested money from relatives, that funds described as wedding expenses had gone elsewhere, and that I had refused the mortgage request because I was being asked to assume legal liability. Everything in the draft was factual. It was also completely unnecessary. Halfway through the third paragraph, I realized what I was doing. I was not informing victims. Gloria, Marianne, Elaine, Robert, and the others already knew what had happened to them. I was building an audience. There was a difference. The email would have felt good for about 10 minutes. Then Mom would have forwarded it to people I had never contacted. Jenna would have accused me of publicly destroying her, and every donor's private financial decision would become part of a family spectacle. More importantly, I would have turned their money into evidence in my argument about my reputation. That was exactly the kind of ownership I had been accusing Mom of taking. I deleted the draft. Not archived. Deleted. Daniel noticed that night when I told him. You sure? Yes. Want me to tell you it was the mature choice? No. Good, because I was going to say you should have at least kept it as a draft. I laughed. Then my phone rang. Dad. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the fact that it was him rather than Mom made me answer. Hi? Can we talk? We are. Not on the phone. I glanced at Daniel. Where? Coffee place near your office. Tomorrow morning. Mom coming? No. That was enough to make me agree. Dad was already there when I arrived. He had chosen a corner table and was holding a paper cup he had barely touched. No laptop, no spreadsheet, no Mom. For a few seconds, I let myself hope that meant something. He looked older than he had at the family meeting. Not dramatically. Just tired. Thanks for coming, he said. What do you want? He frowned. Can we not start like that? You asked to meet. I want to talk about what happened at the wedding. That surprised me. Not the money. The wedding. Dad rubbed one hand over his jaw. Your mother shouldn't have involved Miles the way she did. I waited. She should not have put Jenna's name in that file without explaining it to you. Still, I waited. And the dress was too much. That phrase almost made me laugh. Too much. As if the problem had been taste. Okay, I said. Dad looked frustrated. I'm trying to tell you I know she crossed a line. What else did she involve? He stared at me. I asked again. What else did Mom involve? Allison. You asked me here without her. If there is something I still don't know, tell me. There isn't some giant hidden secret. That isn't what I asked. His expression tightened. For one moment, I thought he might actually do it. I thought he might say, yes, we built the story after the condo refusal. Yes, Diane called people. Yes, I tracked the money. Yes, Jenna knew more than we told Caleb. Yes, we used your wedding details because they made it easier. Instead, Dad looked down at his coffee. Don't turn this into something bigger than it is. I felt the disappointment settle before the anger. What size is it, Dad? He looked up. $32,500? 6 or 8 relatives? A photographer told my sister she was the bride at my wedding. What size am I allowed to call that? That's exactly what I mean. You make everything sound prosecutorial. You brought me a spreadsheet because I wanted to show you the money was accounted for, and I asked you last week whether there was anything else. There isn't. Did you know Mom was telling people I refused to help because I didn't care about Jenna? Dad hesitated. That's not a complicated question. I knew she was explaining the condo situation. Explaining or changing it. She told people you said no. She told people I could help and chose not to because I didn't care enough. You did choose not to help. I stared at him. There, I said. That's why you're here. What does that mean? You still think the story is basically true. Dad leaned back. I think the wording got out of hand. The wording was the mechanism. You always talk like that. Because the words are why people sent money. He shook his head. You are determined to see intent where there was desperation. That sentence mattered, because it was the closest he came to explaining himself. Whose desperation? Your mother's. Mine. Jenna's. What were you desperate about? Dad looked away. Money, I said. He did not answer. Your savings? His eyes came back to mine. That was enough for an inference, not a fact. I remembered the reimbursements in the spreadsheet. I remembered Mom saying relatives should share the burden. I remembered how often Dad had complained over the past few years that Jenna needed another repair, another loan, another temporary rescue. I also remembered him talking about retirement more seriously lately, about wanting to stop working without spending another decade worrying about everybody else. At the time, I still did not know exactly how much fear about retirement had driven him. I only knew money had become the part of the conversation he wanted to organize away. You were tired of paying for Jenna, I said. Dad's face hardened. That is not fair. Then tell me what is. I was trying to keep this family from bleeding money in 10 directions. There it was. Not a confession, but enough. You wanted other people to absorb some of it. They were willing to help. Under information you knew was incomplete. Dad looked tired again. I kept track. I didn't make the phone calls. No, you sent payment instructions. He said nothing. You thanked people. Silence. You moved the money. Allison, I'm not doing this again. Then why did you ask me here? He looked at me for a long moment. Because I want my daughter back. The sentence would have landed differently 2 months earlier. I'm sitting right here. You know what I mean. I do. You want the version of me who stops asking once everyone gets uncomfortable. That is not what I said. It is what you're asking. Dad stood. So this is it? I don't know. Your mother thinks you're going to drag this outside the family. I haven't decided what happens next. You already have. No, other people gave the money. They get a say. Dad looked at me differently then. What have you told them? The truth I can prove. Allison. What? Do not give anyone my spreadsheet. I don't have your spreadsheet. You wrote things down. I wrote what you showed me. His mouth tightened. I stood too. If you are worried about how your own records look when someone else sees the messages beside them, that is not something I created. I left before he could answer. I sat in my car for several minutes afterward. The part that hurt was not that Dad refused to confess. It was that he had arranged a private meeting, acknowledged Mom crossed a line, and still used his opportunity to minimize everything underneath it. He had been given the same kind of exit I gave Jenna. Tell me now. He chose not to. When I got home that evening, I added nothing to my evidence ledger from the emotional parts of our conversation. Dad saying he wanted his daughter back was not evidence. Me believing he feared for retirement was not evidence. Even my conclusion that he wanted to spread Jenna's financial burden was still an inference unless he said it more clearly or documents supported it. I did add 2 factual points. Thomas acknowledged, knowing Diane discussed Allison's condo refusal with relatives. Thomas confirmed he handled tracking, payment administration, but denied making solicitation calls. That was enough. The rest belonged in my understanding of him, not in a packet I would ever hand someone else. 2 days later, Gloria asked if I could come to her hotel near Columbus. She had driven in to see a friend and wanted to talk in person. When Daniel and I arrived, Marianne was already there by video call on Gloria's tablet. Robert joined a few minutes later from home. I sat down and immediately said, "If this is about confronting Mom and Dad as a group, I'm not organizing that." Gloria shook her head. "It isn't." "What is it?" She folded her hands on the table. "We talked to an attorney." I looked from her to the tablet. "You what?" Marianne said. "Not to file anything. To understand what our options are," Robert added. "And to know what records actually matter." He sat back. For the first time since the wedding, a major decision had happened without me initiating it. My first reaction was relief. My second was discomfort. I had gotten so used to managing the information that part of me immediately wanted to ask who the attorney was, what they had said, whether the timeline was correct, whether everyone had sent complete records. I stopped myself. "What do you need from me?" Gloria watched me carefully. "Facts." "I can do that." The attorney wants the wedding contracts showing who actually had the venue and catering agreements. Miles's intake if he's willing to preserve it, and the timeline you built. I can provide my contracts. I'll ask Miles what he is comfortable preserving or providing appropriately. Good. Did the attorney tell you to demand money back? Gloria smiled faintly. You're doing it again. What? Trying to take over. I closed my mouth. She reached across the table and touched my wrist. This part isn't yours to carry. The sentence embarrassed me because it felt so obvious once she said it. The money was theirs. The decision was theirs. The hurt was theirs. My wedding had been used as part of the story, and my name had been used to justify it. But I did not own the entire consequence just because I had assembled the clearest timeline. I'll give you what I have, I said. Only what you can support. Obviously. Gloria smiled. There she is. Over the next hour, I walked them through the chronology, without labeling anyone's motives. I explained the condo refusal date, the first donor message, the Miles intake, the wedding contracts, the staged photo window, and Dad's displayed spreadsheet as accurately as I could. Where I did not have a copy, I said so. Where I was inferring, I labeled it inference. Nobody asked me whether Mom was evil. Nobody asked whether Jenna deserved to lose Caleb. Nobody asked whether Dad should be arrested. They asked practical questions. Who had original message threads? Who had bank or payment confirmations? What dates were certain? What was hearsay? What could Miles verify from his business records? By the end of the meeting, I felt something I had not felt since the wedding. Smala. In a good way. I did not have to be the prosecutor, judge, family historian, and cleanup crew. I could be the person whose wedding had been used, whose name had been misrepresented, and who knew certain facts. That was enough. The next morning, Gloria texted me. I opened the message at my desk. The attorney wants every original message thread, every payment record, your actual contracts, and Miles's original intake. Not screenshots if originals still exist. They want the records preserved before anyone is contacted formally. I read it twice. Then I forwarded one sentence to Daniel. This is officially not just a family argument anymore. The attorney's first instruction was almost disappointingly simple. Preserve everything. Gloria forwarded it to the small group of relatives who had already spoken with counsel. Keep the original message threads. Keep payment confirmations. Do not crop screenshots if the full conversation still existed. Do not delete old emails just because they were embarrassing. Do not confront anyone in a way that might make them erase records before copies were secured. For the first time since I started building my own timeline, I stopped thinking like the person who had to assemble the whole picture and started thinking like a source. I pulled the wedding contracts Daniel and I had signed, the payment schedules, the venue invoice, the catering agreement, and the florist documentation. I made clean copies and labeled each one by date. I sent Gloria only the documents that proved what I personally knew: that the venue belonged to Daniel and me, that our catering agreement was ours, and that no Jenna and Caleb wedding existed inside those contracts. Then I built a chronology that was deliberately boring. Date, person, statement, amount, source, known fact, no motive. No labels like fraud, theft, manipulation, or conspiracy. October 3rd. Diane told Gloria that I could help Jenna but would not. October 4th. The earliest contribution appeared in Thomas's own tracking, based on what he had displayed to me. October 19th. Gloria was told Jenna was in danger of losing a venue deposit. October 22nd. Gloria sent $8,000. 6 months before my wedding, Miles's intake listed Jenna as bride and Caleb as groom. Wedding day. Miles attempted to position Jenna for the bridal family session because that was the brief he had received. The more neutral the document became, the worse it looked. Daniel read it beside me one night and said, "You know what's strange?" "What?" "You don't need to explain what's wrong with it." That was true. Once the dates were lined up, the story no longer needed my anger to make sense. Miles handled his part carefully. I told him the relative's attorney had asked whether he would preserve the original intake, shot list, timestamps, and the limited messages tied directly to the planned session. He said yes. He did not send me his entire client history. He did not volunteer unrelated private messages. He simply confirmed he still had the original business records and would retain them. A week later, Gloria called. The letter went out. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store. "To Mom and Dad?" "Yes." "What does it say?" "I'm not going to read you the whole thing." "Good." She laughed softly. "You're learning." The letter was not a lawsuit. It did not accuse them of crimes. It said several relatives had transferred money after receiving specific representations about wedding-related expenses, that those representations appeared inconsistent with the available records, and that the recipients were demanding repayment. It also instructed Diane and Thomas to preserve relevant communications and financial records while the matter was being evaluated. If they refused to resolve it, the letter said the donors would consider available civil remedies. That was all. No police. No courtroom. No dramatic deadline at midnight. Just a formal statement that people who had been treated separately were now comparing facts together. Mom called me less than 2 hours later. I almost did not answer. Then I decided I wanted to hear which argument she chose first. "You knew about this," she said. "No, hello. I knew they were speaking with an attorney. You helped them. I gave them documents that belonged to me. You gave them ammunition against your parents. I gave them my wedding contracts. That is exactly what I mean." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Why are my wedding contracts ammunition?" Mom was silent for a second. Then she changed direction. "You can stop this." "No. You haven't even asked what they're demanding. Repayment, among other things." That told me she had read the letter carefully. "What else?" "A written statement." I already knew that part was being discussed, but I wanted to hear how she described it. "They want us to sign something saying everything we told people was false." "Is that what it says?" "It says Jenna did not have a wedding at that venue." "Fine. It says you and Daniel did not ask anyone for money." "Fine. Then it says the statements about wedding expenses were inaccurate. Were they?" Mom's breathing changed. "This is not a deposition." I asked one question. "You know exactly what they're trying to do." "What?" "Humiliate us." I leaned back in my chair. Gloria sent $8,000 because she thought Jenna was about to lose a venue. She wanted to help Jenna. And now she wants her money back. She doesn't need it. The sentence came out so easily that for a second I thought I had misheard. "What?" "She's retired comfortably. This isn't going to hurt her." I closed my eyes. There it was again. If someone could absorb a loss, the loss became morally available. Whether Gloria needs the money is not your decision. You sound like an attorney now. No, I sound like the person you keep asking to approve other people's choices for them. Mom raised her voice. "I am asking you to talk to her." "To say what?" that this was a family misunderstanding. It wasn't my misunderstanding. You could tell her you don't feel harmed. I'm not the only person involved. That is exactly why this has gone too far. I almost admired the logic. Too many people now had agency, so the situation had gone too far. I'm not calling Gloria. You would rather watch your parents lose money than say one sentence? If the sentence is false, yes. She hung up on me. Daniel came in from the backyard a minute later. How was that? Mom thinks Gloria being financially stable means $8,000 matters less. He stared at me. Seriously? Apparently wealth is consent now. That seems convenient. It always is when the person applying the rule isn't the one losing anything. The next development came through Dad. He did not call me directly. Instead, he sent a message, asking whether I had given the attorney a copy of the spreadsheet. I replied, I do not have a copy of your spreadsheet. He responded, then how do they know what codes I used? I read that twice. I had not told Gloria every code. I had told her what Dad had shown me, and clearly labeled that I did not possess the original file. If the attorney knew more, it was because other donors had preserved Dad's own texts, or because Dad had disclosed information after receiving the demand. I wrote back, you showed me the spreadsheet voluntarily. I documented what I observed. If you need to explain your records, explain them to your own counsel. He called immediately. Allison, those codes are being taken out of context. What context fixes them? Ven does not mean I promised the money would literally go to a venue. What does it mean? That was the note connected to the conversation. Then the conversation matters. Exactly. He sounded relieved, as if I had agreed with him. I continued. Which is why Gloria's messages matter. She was told venue. You coded it Ven. Then the money moved somewhere else. Dad exhaled sharply. The money still went to Jenna. That is not the defense you think it is. You are twisting bookkeeping. No. The problem is that the bookkeeping lines up with what people were told. There was silence. Dad had spent weeks believing the spreadsheet proved cleanliness because every dollar had a destination. He had never understood that the destination was not the only question. The source mattered. The reason mattered. What the donor believed mattered. You should not have given them my notes, he said. I didn't give them your file. You told them what you saw. Yes. That was private family information. You showed it to me to prove nothing was wrong. He did not answer. That was the first time I heard real uncertainty in him. Not guilt. Not remorse. Uncertainty. His own record had stopped feeling like a shield. A few days later, Gloria told me both sides were discussing settlement instead of letting the matter grow into litigation. I was relieved, not because I wanted Mom and Dad protected, but because I had no interest in spending a year listening to relatives testify about who said what in October. The basic structure was simple enough. Repayment, some contribution toward documented attorney costs as part of the negotiated resolution, no admission of legal liability, and a factual correction. That last piece created the biggest fight. The draft did not call my parents criminals. It did not accuse Jenna of fraud. It said no wedding between Jenna Parker and Caleb Morris had occurred at the venue where Daniel and I were married. It said Daniel and I had not requested, solicited, or received the donor money. It said certain statements describing funds as needed for venue, catering, or other wedding expenses were inaccurate. I thought the wording was almost clinical. Mom thought it was an attack. She called again. Why do they need your name in this? Because my wedding was used. The money didn't go to you. Exactly. That's obvious. Apparently it wasn't. She went quiet. Then she said, You told them to put that in. No. Don't lie to me. I didn't draft the settlement, but you want it there. Yes. The honesty stopped her for a second. Why? Because you told people I could have helped Jenna and chose not to. You used my wedding details to make the requests believable. So yes, I want it factually clear that Daniel and I did not ask for or receive that money. You're obsessed with clearing your name. No, I'm refusing to let you keep using it. That is the same thing. It isn't. Mom's voice dropped lower. If we sign that, everyone will think you were right. I actually laughed then. Not because it was funny, Because after everything, she had finally said the part she had been protecting. This isn't about me being right. It absolutely is. No, it's about what happened. You want people to know you weren't involved. I wasn't. You want people to know you didn't refuse to help with a wedding. There was no wedding. You know what I mean. I do, that's the problem. She became quiet again. I could almost hear her trying to find another angle. Then she said, "If I sign that, everyone will know you had nothing to do with it." I looked through the window at the backyard, at a patch of late spring sunlight crossing the grass. "Yes. And you're comfortable with what that does to us?" I answered carefully. "I'm comfortable with the truth not being assigned to the wrong person." Mom did not respond. She ended the call a few seconds later. Afterward, I sat at the table without moving. For months, I had thought the central conflict was money. Then I thought it was Jenna. Then I thought it was my parents' need to rescue her. By that point, I understood something simpler. Mom could tolerate repaying the money more easily than she could tolerate losing control of the story. The settlement would cost her dollars. The correction would cost her the version of me she had been using to justify everything. Caleb called me the following afternoon while I was at work. I let the call go to voicemail because I was in the middle of a supplier meeting, but 10 minutes later he texted, asking whether I could speak when I had a few minutes. The message was polite enough that I knew he was trying hard not to sound desperate. I closed my office door during lunch and called him back. "I'm not asking you what I should do about Jenna," he said almost immediately. "I need to know what you actually have that involves her." His voice sounded tired rather than angry. I appreciated the distinction because the last thing I wanted was to become the person deciding whether someone else's engagement survived. I told him the same thing I had told everyone else. I would separate what I could prove from what I suspected. I started with Gloria's message, not Miles. I told him Gloria had been led to believe her money was helping with a wedding venue, and that Jenna had later thanked her specifically for helping with that venue. I explained that I had the original text thread, not just a memory of the conversation. Then I stopped. I did not offer my interpretation of why Jenna sent it. Caleb was quiet for several seconds. "She told me Gloria knew it was general help." "I know. She said your mother was just using wedding language because people understood it better." "That may be what she told you. It isn't what Gloria's messages say." He exhaled. "What about the pictures?" I chose the narrowest answer. Miles's records show Jenna had access to the portal and asked about the floral arch. She knew your understanding was that the pictures were engagement-style family photos. And she knew something else? Yes. What? That Diane wanted the pictures for relatives who had helped. He swore softly, then apologized. "You don't need to apologize to me," I said. "I feel like an idiot. You were given different information. That doesn't make me feel better." "No, it usually doesn't." He asked whether I could send him copies. I told him I would not send Gloria's private messages without her permission, but he had every right to ask Jenna directly what she had told Gloria and what she had written to Miles. If Jenna wanted to show him the portal thread herself, she could. If Gloria agreed later, I would send only the specific exchange that affected him. "I understand," he said. "I just need to know whether she is still lying. That part isn't something I can answer for you." He laughed once, bitterly. "I think you just did. I had not meant to." That bothered me enough that after the call, I sat for a minute before reopening my email. There was a line I did not want to cross. Jenna had lied to me. She had participated in the staged photo plan. She had benefited from money people gave under false information. Those were facts. Whether that made her someone Caleb could still marry belonged to Caleb. Gloria called me that evening before I could ask her about the text. Caleb had already contacted her through Jenna's phone records and apologized for pulling her into the relationship problem. Gloria sounded sad more than angry. "He asked if I'd let him see the message Jenna sent me," she said. "What did you tell him?" "Yes." "You're comfortable with that?" "I'm the one she sent it to." "Fair." Gloria hesitated. "I told him I wasn't asking him to leave her." "Good." "I also told him not to stay just because he feels sorry for everyone." That sounded like Gloria. She had become the one person in this mess who understood that help was only meaningful if the person offering it got to choose what it meant. Caleb called again later that night. This time from his car. His voice had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but the uncertainty was gone. She admitted she knew Gloria thought it was wedding money, he said. I did not answer immediately. She says she didn't know your mother was telling multiple people different stories. She says she thought everybody was just helping us get started. That's possible. She also says she didn't know the photos were supposed to prove there had been a wedding. I looked at the printed portal message on my desk. Do you believe her? I asked. I don't know. That's not something I can fix. I'm not asking you to. He paused. What exactly did she write to Miles? I read only the relevant line from the preserved record. Mom needs some really good ones for the relatives who helped. So I don't want us rushed. Then I read the line about Caleb thinking they were engagement and family pictures because that's easier. There was silence on the line. Finally, he said. She told me she never discussed the purpose of the pictures with him. I closed my eyes. That isn't consistent with the record. No. He sounded calmer than I expected. Sometimes anger comes after confusion. Sometimes something clearer comes instead. Caleb asked, Did she ever have a chance to tell you the truth before you found this? Yes. When? I met her privately before this got formal. What did you ask? I told her if Diane had dragged her into something, she should tell me then. I said I would distinguish between being used and choosing to participate. And what did she say? That there was nothing else. She swore she thought the money was just normal gifts. Caleb went quiet again. This time, I did not fill the silence. The next day, Jenna showed up at my house without calling. Daniel was home, but I asked him to give us the kitchen for a few minutes. He stayed close enough that I knew I was not alone, but far enough that the conversation remained mine. Jenna looked worse than she had at the coffee shop. Her makeup was uneven, and she had clearly been crying. You sent him the messages. Gloria gave Caleb permission to see her message. Miles preserved his business records. You gave him enough. I gave him facts he directly asked about. She laughed sharply. That is such a convenient way to say it. What would you call it? Destroying my relationship while pretending your hands are clean. I stayed seated. Caleb asked you whether you knew Gloria thought she was paying for your wedding. What did you tell him? That is none of your business. You came to my house to blame me for his reaction. That makes the answer relevant. Jenna folded her arms. I told him I knew she helped. That is not what I asked. She stared at me with open contempt. You love this. Love what? Being right. The accusation landed close enough to something real that I had to think before answering. I did care about being accurate. I hated being misrepresented. I took satisfaction in finding contradictions, because contradictions could not shout me down. But that was not the same thing as enjoying what was happening to her. I don't love any of this, I said. But I am not going to lie because the truth is inconvenient for you. You could have kept Caleb out of it. His name was on the photographer's file as the groom. He didn't know. I know. He would never have known if you hadn't kept digging. That sentence told me more than she intended. I leaned back slightly. Do you hear yourself? What? You are not saying the pictures were harmless. You are saying Caleb would have been easier to manage if he never knew. That isn't what I mean. It is exactly what Mom says about everyone. Gloria wouldn't understand. Caleb would overreact. I would say no. So every person gets a different version until they agree. Jenna's eyes filled again. I just wanted one thing to work out. The condo? My life. The answer was raw enough that I believed it. She sat across from me without asking and wiped at her face. You have Daniel, she said. You have the job. You had your wedding exactly the way you wanted it. Every time I get close to something, it falls apart. That doesn't make somebody else responsible for holding it together. I know that now. Do you? She looked up. Because when I gave you a chance to tell me, you lied. When Caleb asked, you gave him half the truth. You are here now because the records forced the other half out. Her face hardened again. You never wanted me to have the condo. I did not want my name on the mortgage. Same thing. No, it only feels like the same thing if you think my resources automatically belong in your plan. She stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. You are unbelievable. Maybe. I hope being right is worth it. I did not answer. She left. Daniel came into the kitchen a minute later. How bad? She thinks I wanted the condo to fail. Did you? No. He waited. I did think the mortgage was a bad idea. That is not the same thing. I know. He looked toward the front door. Do you think Caleb is going to leave? I think Caleb is going to decide whatever he can live with. He did. 2 days later, he asked if Daniel and I could meet him for coffee. I almost refused because I did not want to be present for a post-mortem on their relationship, but he said he only wanted to tell us directly what had happened, so we would not hear a distorted version through the family. He looked exhausted when he arrived. I ended it, he said. Daniel did not react beyond a small nod. I asked, Are you sure? I am sure I cannot buy property or marry someone when I do not know which parts of our financial life are real. That answer mattered. Not the wedding photos. Not Mom. Not me. Money and trust. Caleb explained that when he and Jenna applied for the condo, she had presented the reserve as family help. He had known Diane and Thomas were contributing something, but not how the money had been raised, and not that part of it came from relatives who believed they were funding wedding expenses. He also learned Jenna had minimized how much of her credit card debt had been paid using the same pool. I asked her yesterday to tell me everything, he said. No documents, no messages, just her. I said if there was anything else, now was the time. I knew where this was going before he finished. She told me there wasn't. And there was? One more transfer she never told me about. Not huge. That wasn't the point. No, it was not. The amount almost did not matter anymore. The pattern did, he continued. I withdrew from the condo process. We hadn't closed. Nothing was owned yet. It just stops. That solved one practical question I had worried about. There would be no dramatic bank seizure, no instant loss of property Jenna owned. The purchase simply would not proceed, because the buyers and their financial picture had changed. I'm sorry, I said. Caleb looked at me. You don't need to be. I'm still sorry. He nodded once. I know. Jenna called me that night. I nearly let it go, but I answered because I wanted no one saying later that I had refused to hear her. He left me, she said. I know. Of course you know. Caleb told Daniel and me. You got exactly what you wanted. No. You hated the condo. You hated that Mom helped me. You thought I was irresponsible. Now there's no condo and no wedding. Congratulations. I stayed quiet until she stopped. Then I said, I asked you if there was something else I needed to know. She did not answer. I sat across from you and gave you a chance before Caleb knew any of this. You told me, no, I swear. You would have judged me anyway. Probably. That stopped her. I continued. I might have been angry. I might have judged you. But you would have been telling the truth before someone else proved it. You think that would have changed Caleb? I don't know. That was never my decision. She started crying. For a moment, instinct told me to soften the conversation. Not to fix it. Just to make it easier. I did not. Compassion did not require me to edit reality. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said. I am not taking responsibility for why he left. She hung up. By then, the financial settlement discussions were moving faster. The condo reserve could no longer be defended as money needed for an imminent purchase. Mom and Dad agreed in principle that it would be returned to the repayment pool. That did not cover everything. They would still need to use some non-essential savings, and Dad told one relative they were considering selling the RV. I learned those details through Gloria, not because I was involved in the negotiation. She kept me informed only where the outcome affected the factual correction or involved my wedding records. They've basically agreed on the money, she told me. Basically? Repayment structure, yes. Some attorney costs, too. And the correction? Gloria sighed. Your mother is still fighting it. Of course she was. She wants the language softened. She wants your name removed. I laughed quietly. What reason is she giving? That this should stay focused on the donors. That would be convenient. Council doesn't agree. I expected relief. Instead, I felt tired. Money was leaving the condo reserve. Dad might lose the RV. Jenna had lost Caleb. The wedding lie had collapsed. And still, Mom's last defensive position was the same one she had held from the beginning. She wanted the right to tell everyone what my role had been. 3 evenings later, Daniel and I were cleaning up after dinner when the doorbell rang. Mom and Dad stood outside. Mom held a folder. Dad looked as if he had not slept. I did not invite them farther than the living room. Mom sat, placed the folder on her lap, and said, "We have until tomorrow to finalize this." I looked at Dad. "Is that true?" He nodded. "The terms are basically settled." "Then why are you here?" Mom opened the folder. "Because Gloria will listen to you." I already knew what was coming. "She is not asking me for permission. You can still talk to her." "About what?" Mom's voice tightened. "The statement." Dad finally spoke. "We will repay the money. We agreed to the costs. We are not asking anyone to waive that." "Then what are you asking?" Mom looked directly at me. "1 sentence." I waited. "Tell Gloria you believe this was a family misunderstanding. Tell her there is no reason to put your name and Daniel's name into a written correction." I stared at her. After everything, the request was almost elegant in its simplicity. No money, no loan, no contract, just 1 sentence. One small accommodation. One more time I was being asked to absorb the distortion because I was the person most capable of surviving it. Mom leaned forward. "1 sentence from you, Allison. And this can still stay inside the family." Mom's request hung in the room for several seconds after she finished speaking. She said it as if she were offering me a way out, instead of asking me to step back into the same role I had spent months trying to leave. Dad sat beside her with his hands clasped between his knees, looking exhausted rather than angry. Mom had the settlement folder balanced on her lap, one hand resting over it, as though the paperwork itself had offended her. Daniel sat beside me, quiet, watching my parents but leaving the answer to me. I looked at Dad first. "Is everything else settled?" He nodded. "Mostly." "What does mostly mean?" "The repayment structure is agreed. Will cover part of the documented attorney costs. No admission of liability. We're not fighting those points anymore." Mom cut in. "Because we are trying to end this." I kept my eyes on Dad. "And the written correction? That's the remaining issue." "Then there isn't really a remaining issue. There's one thing you don't want to sign." Mom leaned forward. "Because it's unnecessary." "Which part?" "You know which part. I want to hear you say it." Her mouth tightened. "The part naming you and Daniel." I nodded once. The factual correction did not call my parents criminals. It did not say Jenna had committed fraud. It did not turn the settlement into a confession. It simply said no wedding between Jenna Parker and Caleb Morris had occurred at the venue where Daniel and I were married, that Daniel and I had not solicited or received the contributions, and that certain statements describing those contributions as necessary for venue, catering, floral, or other wedding expenses had been inaccurate. Dry facts. That was all. Yet Mom had fought that paragraph harder than the money. "You're willing to repay more than $30,000, I said. "You're willing to contribute to legal costs. You're willing to sell things. But you came here because you don't want to sign one paragraph that says Daniel and I weren't involved." Mom's voice sharpened. "Because everybody already knows you didn't take the money." "Do they?" "Of course they do." "Then the sentence shouldn't bother you." "That is not the point." "What is?" She looked at me for a long second. "It makes it sound like we used you." "You did." Dad rubbed one hand over his face. "Allison." "What?" "We are trying to get to a place where everybody can move forward. I am not stopping you. You are refusing to help." That sentence almost made me laugh, because it was the oldest accusation in the family and somehow still the one they reached for when nothing else worked. Mom heard the shift in my breathing. "What is funny?" "Nothing. It's just amazing that after all of this, we're back to me refusing to help. This is different." "Is it?" "Yes. We are not asking you for money." "No. You're asking me for credibility." Mom's eyes narrowed. Daniel shifted beside me, but still said nothing. I continued. "You want me to call Gloria and say I believe this was a misunderstanding. You want me to tell her my name does not need to be in the factual correction. Then you can sign something softer and tell yourselves I agreed. The whole thing was just family confusion. That is not what we're doing. What are you doing? Trying to keep this from permanently destroying relationships. Whose? Our family. The relatives whose money you took based on false information are part of the family too. They gave voluntarily. And now they want repayment voluntarily. Mom's jaw tightened. You know that is not the same thing. No, it isn't. Because now they have the full information. Dad leaned forward. We are not disputing that they are entitled to repayment. Good. We are saying there is no reason to keep making this worse. I looked at him. What does worse mean? He did not answer immediately. I waited. Finally he said, making it sound deliberate. I stared at him. Dad, Gloria was told venue. Marianne was told catering. Elaine was told flowers. The money went to credit cards, condo reserve, reimbursements, and other expenses. Mom asked people to keep quiet. You tracked the categories. Miles was hired 6 months before my wedding with Jenna listed as the bride. Jenna was added as a contact. That is not one bad conversation. We never set out to hurt you. That is not the same thing as saying you didn't act deliberately. Mom interrupted. This is exactly what I mean. You take every word and turn it into something legal. I'm not the one who hired attorneys. You helped them. Yes. Her face changed. I had said that before, but this time I did not soften it. Yes, I repeated. I helped them understand what happened. I gave them contracts that belonged to me. I gave them dates I could verify. I did not tell them what to do with the information. You could have stopped them. Yes, that stopped both of my parents. For months, I had avoided saying that sentence because I did not want Mom using it as proof that I controlled the entire outcome. But the sentence was still true in one narrow sense. I could have tried to stop them. I could have called Gloria and said, please don't involve lawyers. I could have told Marianne the family was working it out privately. I could have asked Miles not to provide records. I could have told everyone the money was gone, and preserving peace mattered more than repayment. I could have used my relationship with some of those relatives to slow everything down. I had the ability. I simply had no obligation. Mom stared at me. You admit it. I admit I could have helped you avoid some consequences. And you chose not to. Yes. Her eyes filled immediately. I did not know whether the tears came from anger, humiliation, or genuine pain. It no longer mattered enough for me to guess. Why? She asked. I looked at Jenna's entire life in that question. Why had I not rescued Mom? Why had I not softened the truth? Why had I not taken the larger burden because I was the person most capable of carrying it? Because avoiding consequences is how Jenna got here. Mom flinched. Dad closed his eyes briefly. I continued before either of them could redirect the conversation. You protected her from embarrassment, then debt, then questions. You hid where money came from because Caleb might react badly. You changed explanations because relatives might not give if they knew the truth. You told people I refused to help because that made them more willing to step in. Every time reality might force Jenna to deal with something uncomfortable, somebody created another cushion. That is an ugly way to describe helping your daughter, Mom said. I'm your daughter too. The room went still. Mom's expression changed, but I did not stop. And that is the part I finally understand. You didn't think you were choosing Jenna over me because, in your mind, I didn't need choosing. I would be fine. I would find another way. I would get over it. I could afford the risk. I could take the insult. I could survive missing something. So every time there was a choice between protecting Jenna from discomfort and protecting me from being used, you picked Jenna because you assumed I would recover. Mom's eyes hardened. You have always been stronger. That does not make me available. She looked away. Dad spoke quietly. No one thought of you that way. You did. That is not fair. Then explain the logic. He looked at me. Why was I supposed to co-borrow on the condo? To help your sister. Why me? Because you had the credit. Why was my wedding acceptable background for Jenna's fake bridal session? It wasn't supposed to become a problem. Why not? Dad said nothing. Because the venue was already paid for. The arch was already there. The photographer was already there. The room was already decorated. You thought using those things cost me nothing. Mom shook her head. You are twisting everything. No, I am finally naming the rule. What rule? If I can survive losing something, you think it doesn't count as a loss. Mom stood abruptly. That is ridiculous. I stood too. Not because I was trying to dominate the room, but because I was done sitting while she tried to turn the conversation into another lecture. Is it? Yes. Then why did you tell Gloria I could help but wouldn't? Because you could. Why did that matter? Because Jenna needed someone. And because you believed I had enough to absorb it. Mom opened her mouth. I kept going. When I was 17 and the money for my summer program went somewhere else, you said I would find another way. I did. When Jenna needed help later, the same logic showed up again. I would be fine. Allison will figure it out. Allison can afford it. Allison is independent. Every time I solved the problem, you treated the solution as proof you hadn't taken anything. Dad looked uncomfortable. We are not going back 20 years. I am not relitigating childhood. I am telling you why this feels familiar. Mom folded her arms. You always have to make yourself the victim. That one landed harder than I expected. For a second, I felt the old urge to defend myself, to list the ways I had paid my own way, to explain the mortgage risk again, to remind her that I had never asked them to finance my wedding, to prove I was not inventing hardship just because I finally refused to absorb somebody else's. Then I realized that response would put me back inside the same argument. So I said, maybe you believe that. She stared at me. I continued. It does not change the settlement. Her face flushed. Dad looked between us. Can we focus on what happens now? Yes. He seemed relieved. What do you want from us? He asked. That question surprised me more than anything Mom had said. I sat back down slowly. For months, they had assumed I wanted punishment. Then they assumed I wanted revenge. Then they assumed I wanted to humiliate them. But when Dad asked directly what I wanted, I realized how little I needed from them. I don't want money. We know. I don't want part of the repayment. That was never on the table. I don't want an apology written into the settlement. Mom looked skeptical. I don't want a public confession. I don't want you posting something online. I don't want people choosing sides because I told them to. I don't want Jenna's relationship ending, treated like a win for me. Dad watched me carefully. I want the factual correction to stay factual. That's it? He asked. Yes. And after that, I looked at both of them. After that, you live with the relationships that remain. Mom laughed bitterly. So you are cutting us off. I didn't say that. You don't need to. I'm not making a permanent declaration tonight. Then what are you doing? Stopping. She frowned. Stopping what? Fixing. Mom shook her head as if the word itself annoyed her. I continued. I'm not going to call Gloria. I'm not going to ask anybody to forgive you. I'm not going to tell Jenna Caleb will come back. I'm not going to explain your intentions to relatives. I'm not going to use my name to soften the correction. If you want relationships repaired, you repair them. That sounds like punishment. No, it sounds like responsibility. Mom looked at Daniel. For the first time that evening, she addressed him directly. You're okay with this? Daniel's expression remained calm. She doesn't need my permission. I didn't ask if she did. You asked whether I'm okay with her decision. I am. You've changed her. I almost laughed. Daniel did not. She had boundaries before me. Not like this. He looked at me once, then back at her. Maybe because you kept treating boundaries like the opening position in a negotiation. Mum's face went flat. I put a hand lightly against Daniel's arm. Not to stop him, just to tell him I had it. Dad stood. We should go. Mom stayed where she was. Diane. She picked up the folder. At the door, she turned toward me. When this destroys what is left of the family, remember that you could have stopped it. I looked at her. No, I could have hidden it. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked out. Dad stayed behind long enough to look at me once more. I hoped this was worth it. I hated the question because it reduced everything to a trade. $32,000 against family peace. Written correction against my parents' reputation. Truth against comfort. But that was not the equation. I hope you eventually ask yourself why it only became unacceptable when it became expensive, I said. Dad's face changed. He left without answering. The settlement was finalized the next afternoon. I did not attend any meeting. There was no courtroom, no dramatic confrontation. Gloria called me afterward and asked whether I wanted to hear the final language that mentioned Daniel and me. Yes. She read it slowly. No wedding between Jenna Parker and Caleb Morris had occurred at the venue on April 18th. Allison Parker and Daniel Brooks had not requested, solicited, directed, or received the family contributions at issue. Certain statements connecting those funds to venue, catering, floral, or other wedding expenses had been inaccurate. The document included repayment obligations, a negotiated contribution toward documented attorney costs, preservation language, and no admission of legal liability. That last part mattered legally. The factual correction mattered emotionally. My parents had not been forced to write. We lied. They had been required to sign facts that made the lie impossible to maintain. When Gloria finished reading, she asked, "You okay?" "Yes." "You sound strange." "I expected it to feel bigger." "What did you think would happen?" "I don't know, maybe relief." "Do you feel relieved?" I thought about it. A little. That's probably enough for today. The consequences unfolded slowly after that. Gloria received the first repayment within the agreed period. Marianne confirmed hers arrived. Elaine did not discuss the matter with me anymore, which I respected. Robert told Dad he needed some distance. Another relative continued speaking to my parents but stopped lending or giving money. Nobody created a formal family exile. Nobody announced that Diane and Thomas Parker were dead to them. The responses varied because the people involved were adults with different limits. That felt healthier than the version Mom feared, where one person decided how everyone else should react. The first practical consequence I learned, directly from Dad, was the RV. He texted me 2 weeks after settlement. Listed the RV today. That was all. I stared at the message for almost a minute. Dad had wanted that RV for years. When he finally bought it, he talked about retirement routes the way other people talked about dream houses. Yellowstone, South Dakota, Montana. Maybe up into Canada, depending on timing. He had maps saved on his phone. He and Daniel once spent an entire dinner comparing fuel costs and campground reservations. A few hours after the text, I saw the listing on a public marketplace. White exterior, gray trim, small awning. The interior Mom had spent months choosing. Something in my chest tightened. Daniel saw the screen when he came into the living room. "You okay?" "Yes." He sat beside me. I closed the browser. "I just wish being right felt better than this." He nodded. "You don't have to enjoy a consequence for it to be deserved." "I know. Do you want to help them keep it?" "No." The answer came before I could think. That mattered. The sadness was real. So was the boundary. For most of my life, if I saw a problem I could solve, some internal part of me immediately started calculating whether I should solve it. Could I lend the money? Could I cover the gap? Could I explain the misunderstanding? Could I make the call? Could I absorb the risk more easily than someone else? Now I looked at the RV listing and understood something simple. Not mine. Dad and Mom did not lose their house. They did not declare bankruptcy. Dad did not become destitute. The settlement was painful, not catastrophic. The condo reserve went back into the repayment pool. They used other non-essential savings. The RV sold and covered part of the remaining obligation. Their retirement plans changed, but they still had retirement savings. Dad would simply not take the road trip on the schedule he had imagined. That was consequence, not destruction. Jenna's consequences came differently. She texted Daniel instead of me a few weeks after Caleb ended the engagement. The condo purchase was officially over. Because they had not closed, there was no property to divide, no foreclosure, no legal battle. The application had already been withdrawn. The money earmarked for the purchase was no longer protecting a future condo. It went back toward repayment. I did not hear from Caleb for almost a month. Then Daniel ran into him near downtown Columbus. Later that evening, Caleb sent me a short message. "I'm okay. I don't blame you. Just wanted you to know." I replied, "I'm glad you're okay." Nothing more. Jenna and I did not speak. I did not block her. She did not apologize. I did not send her evidence she had already seen. The strangest part was that no one asked me to fix the silence. No call from Dad telling me to be the bigger person. No message from Mom saying Jenna was fragile. No request to invite her over. For the first time I could remember, everyone had too much evidence of how we got there to pretend the distance had appeared from nowhere. Mom contacted me again 3 weeks after the RV sold. "Your father and I did everything everyone asked. How long are you going to punish us?" I read it over dinner. Daniel noticed my face. "What?" I handed him the phone. He read the message and gave it back. "You answering?" "Yes." I typed slowly. "Repaying money you obtained under a lie wasn't something you did for me." I read it once before sending. Mom answered almost immediately. "So that's it?" I did not respond. Another message came. "You really think you've done nothing wrong in any of this?" That question made me put the phone down, because the honest answer was more complicated than I wanted. I had judged Jenna, sometimes unfairly. I had looked at her dependence and let it make me feel morally superior. I had treated self-sufficiency like proof of character when some of it was temperament, opportunity, education, and luck combined with hard work. I had become clinical with Gloria when I first started asking questions, because dates and documents were easier than sitting with somebody else's hurt. I had almost sent a mass email that would have turned other people's losses into evidence for clearing my reputation. I had flaws. I had made mistakes. What I had not done was invent the wedding. I had not solicit money. I had not lie about venue costs. I had not list Jenna as the bride at my wedding. I had not make Caleb pose under an arch without telling him why. And I was finally capable of admitting my own imperfections without volunteering to absorb responsibility for theirs. That was new. I did not answer Mom. A week later, Lena emailed that our wedding album was ready. Daniel and I opened it together at the dining table. The first pages were quiet. My dress hanging near the window. My bouquet. Daniel adjusting his cuffs. The venue before guests arrived. Then the ceremony. There was a photograph of me moments before walking down the aisle. I remembered exactly what had happened less than 10 minutes earlier. Miles had called Jenna the bride. Mom had tried to preserve the fake photo session. Dad had supported the delay. Daniel had wanted them removed. I had chosen to begin the ceremony. In the photograph, none of that was obvious. I looked serious, focused, not smiling yet. Daniel leaned closer. "That's the face you make when someone misses a contract deadline." I was about to get married. Same intensity. I smiled. He turned the page. There, I was reaching him at the end of the aisle. That picture was completely different. I was smiling. So was he. For one moment on that day, everything else had disappeared. Later pages showed the reception. Our first dance. Guests laughing. My aunt crying. Daniel making me laugh on the terrace after joking that I had turned my wedding into a procurement audit. "That one," he said when we reached it. "I knew you'd pick it. You look happy." I was. Despite everything, I looked at the photograph. Yes, that answer mattered. My parents had disrupted part of the wedding. They had not taken the entire thing. There was a difference between acknowledging harm and letting harm claim every memory around it. I kept turning pages. There were imperfect shots. A couple of family combinations missing because the schedule had been disrupted. A guest's phone had captured one reception moment better than either professional photographer. Miles's images after the ceremony were mostly harmless candids because once Allison Parker became the only person giving him instructions that mattered, he followed them. There were no pictures of Jenna standing beneath my arch in ivory. No fake bride and groom portrait with Caleb. No carefully staged image designed to prove a wedding that had never existed. The album was imperfect. It was also honest. I rested my fingers on the edge of one page. Daniel asked, "Regret not having the perfect family album?" "No. Not even a little?" I thought about it. "No. I think I'm done wanting things to look more intact than they are." He closed the album gently. "For years, I had believed strength meant taking the impact and recovering quickly enough that no one needed to worry about me. That belief had served me well in some ways. It had helped me build a career. It had helped me become financially independent. It had helped me survive disappointment without waiting for rescue. But inside my family, strength had become something else. Available capacity. Mom looked at my ability to recover and saw room to take. Dad looked at my financial stability and saw room to redistribute risk. Jenna looked at my independence and saw evidence that I could afford to lose more than she could. And I had spent years mistaking my ability to survive that arrangement for control over it. I finally understood the difference. A boundary was not saying no and hoping someone respected the answer. A boundary was knowing what I would do when they did not. Helping someone was not an obligation created by being stronger. It was a choice. Love did not automatically create access to my money, my credit, my wedding, my time, or my reputation. Family did not mean one person got to decide what everybody else could afford to lose. And forgiveness, if it ever came, would not require me to rescue anyone from consequences first. Daniel put his hand over mine. You keeping the album on the shelf? Obviously. Even with the missing perfect family pictures? I looked at him, especially because they're missing. He smiled. I looked at the album one last time before closing the box. For the first time in my life, being the one who could handle it didn't mean I had to. You cannot control whether relatives respect your boundaries, but you can control what happens when they cross them. Never confuse being capable with being responsible for everyone else's mistakes. Ask what you're agreeing to, protect your finances, and let dishonest people face consequences. Subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself.